Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Virtual Equal Pay Summit. We are delighted that you've chosen to start your day with us. A few quick notes of housekeeping. Since this is a Zoom webinar instead of a Zoom meeting, participants do not have the ability to be on camera or use their microphone. We are recording the meeting, so you should have just seen a message about that pop up. You're welcome to send messages in the chat. Those will be seen by all of our panelists, and you're also welcome to post questions in the Q&A. We may not have time to get to them all. We're on a pretty tight timeline today, but hopefully some of our speakers will see them and be able to address them during their time slot. So we'll go over the full plan for today in just a bit. But with all of that out of the way, I'm delighted to introduce Charmaine Cassiope, who will provide our welcome. Charmaine Cassiope serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for United Way of Southeast Louisiana. Charmaine is focused on public policy, governmental affairs, and community impact. Her career at the United Way of Southeast Louisiana has included the successful advocating for the first ever EITC state match, passage of the child tax care credits, implementing statewide high-quality early child care rating system, securing funding for the Louisiana 211 Information Referral and Crisis Management, and advocating for the historic passage of Louisiana domestic violence laws. She serves as chair of the Louisiana Women's Policy and Research Commission, and she serves as a board member for the Bureau of Governmental Research, Louisiana Budget Project, and the New Orleans Family Justice Center. And hot off the presses, please join me in congratulating Charmaine for being named one of New Orleans City Business's 2021 Women of the Year. Congrats and welcome, Charmaine.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda, and good morning to everyone. I'm so delighted to be with you this morning and especially grateful that you've chosen to take time out of your busy schedules to join us today as we explore and find the real solutions to the gender pay gap. As Amanda said, I'm Charmaine Cassiope, and I couldn't be more thrilled than to serve as the chair of the Louisiana Women's Policy and Research Commission. This commission is made up of 25 extraordinary women from across Louisiana who work tirelessly year-round to identify and to address the needs of women and their families. Last year, we produced the first ever Status of Women in Louisiana report, which actually outlined 12 issues that we think are the most pressing and have the most tremendous capacity to improve the overall well-being of Louisiana women and their families. Hopefully our team at this point can drop that link to this report in the chat for those of you who may not have read it, and I would encourage you to share it with all women that you have the opportunity to interact with. For us in the commission, equal pay has been a top priority issue. We're fortunate to have a cadre of strong women who have championed this cause, both behind the scenes and in the legislative hearings, literally for years. Their drumbeat has echoed loud and clear throughout the state capitol. You've seen them in their red suits walking all over the Capitol. You've worn their pins and you've activated when they asked you to contact your legislator. We are really grateful to these women because you know what? Their passion as advocates has determined that they will never give up. And today is an example that we will not give up until we find the solutions to end the pay gap. Today, we will build on their work. We want to translate their message into a broader array of strategies that together form the equal pay agenda. You know, equal pay is not just about one bill. This is a much bigger, it's much bigger than just one day at the state legislature. If we really want to see parity for women, we have to fully support working women and their families. An equal pay agenda includes affordable, accessible early care and education. An equal pay agenda includes paid family and medical leave. An equal pay agenda includes changing cultural norms so that women and men can share in the caregiving responsibilities of their children and their aging parents. And an equal pay agenda involves individual action, a commitment and action by our employers, and the passage of state policies. I think what I'm trying to say is for all of you out there, we each have a role to play in this incredibly important debate. So I welcome you into the fold and into the strategy session where we can pull it all together to improve the lives of all women across Louisiana. And you know, I can't think of a better way to start this exciting day than to turn it over to my dear friend, an extraordinary advocate and a champion for all of Louisiana's women and families, our First Lady, Donna Edwards. Join me in welcoming Donna Edwards to give us her perspective on this important issue.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. You just really excited me with all your words. I'm very proud to be here. And hello to everyone. Such a joy to be with you this morning, especially to talk about an issue as important as equal pay. As many of you know, equal pay for women has been a priority for my husband since his first time in the Louisiana Legislature. It hits so close to home for us. We have 3 children and 2 daughters in the workforce and a son who's in college. And all 3 have been taught the importance of getting a good education and hard work ethic to help them succeed in the workplace. And it is both painful and upsetting to think that my daughters, our daughters, would not receive the same pay as their male counterparts for the same work simply because of their gender. But the gap in gender pay in Louisiana and this country is real. And John Bell and I believe that it is time to begin to close that gap. You know, I've shared this story with you all once before, and because I'm often challenged by even women, is there really such a thing as this gap? And I always use this as an example. Our niece several years ago, within the last 5 years, applied for a job in the healthcare industry. So the gentleman prior to her taking that job, she was going to replace him. Just to pair them up, they both had the same educational experience, but she actually brought to the position that she was going to, replace his position. She brought to that job work that she'd already been doing in that area. So she brought a lot of knowledge with her to that position. Probably about a year into that job, she happened upon some paperwork that showed how much he made as a new employee to that position. So he made $100,000. So I know we don't have where everybody can speak, but you can go ahead and guess how much she started off with. Having more experience, bringing it to the job, she started off with 70,000. So it's a real issue, and it is really happening. And we've tried so hard to legislate equal pay, and we've seen some success. The Equal Pay for Women Act passed the Louisiana Legislature in 2013. It only applies to state employees, but has given us exciting evidence that these types of legislative efforts are effective. The gap between earnings of men and women in state employment has shrunk dramatically by almost 9% since the act was passed. In 2012, the Louisiana census data showed women in the public sector made 84.1 cents for every dollar a man made. And in 2019, women in the public sector earned 92.9 cents for every dollar. In the same time period, the gap has barely changed in the private sector. So women in the private sector in 2012 made 62.1 cents for every dollar a man made. And then in 2019, they rose to only 64.1 cents for every dollar. And according to the National Women's Law Center's most current state-by-state tables, the gender pay gap is worse for Louisiana, no surprise. Louisiana African-American women who made 49 cents for every dollar a white male earns, and then the Hispanic women 53 cents on a dollar. We all know that COVID-19 pandemic has certainly impacted everyone in many ways. So this setback makes the need for action all the more urgent. Now, let's do this. Our other legislative efforts have met with strong resistance. John Bell's package bill on equal pay this year would have banned the use of salary history in hiring and would have made it clear that employees have a right to talk about their wages with their work colleagues without fear of losing their jobs. That bill passed the House Labor Committee, but as many of you know, never got a vote on the House floor. What excites me about today's Equal Pay Summit is that we are beginning to talk about this issue differently. Today, we're looking at it along a spectrum. There is work to do at the individual level, at the employer level, and at the legislative level. Today, you'll have the opportunity to participate in a salary negotiation workshop. You'll hear from expert panelists on the simple practices employers can do to reduce the gender gap. And you'll get a look at what other states are doing to address equal pay. So all in all, I hope we'll begin to build a whole agenda for equal pay. And it will take more than one bill each session to really move that needle on this forward and to help us be more impartially shift the unfair burdens on women that make up some of the root causes of this issue. And COVID has taught us so many things, but a clear lesson was that women are still expected to handle most of the duties associated with caring for children and sick family members, all while juggling their own demands from home, the workplace, and having access to quality and affordable childcare to support their families. I mean, we all saw that happen right before our eyes. So I hope today you'll be able to participate in the full day today and you'll stay engaged so that we can meaningfully change the 2022 legislative session and beyond. And with the knowledge that you learned today, you can negotiate for higher wages at your jobs, lobby your employers to adopt good HR practices, and become informed advocates ready to educate our policymakers about what we need to do and why. Let's not forget that over 50% of our women are the lead earners in their families and single moms. This is an important issue for our families, for all of our families, for our children, and to our future. So I'm asking you today to get involved, learn, and be able to dialogue with others, other women, and to encourage them to be involved, and then stay involved because we need you walking along each of us, arm in arm, as we start to break away at this. It's been a pleasure being with you all this morning, and I'm looking forward to learning with you as we jump right in today. So thank you, and God bless each and every one of you. And thank you again to Amanda and all the hard work she's done to really bring all of this together. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Edwards, for spending your time with us and for sharing those words with us this morning. I love that you always bring up equal pay in your speeches, even if it isn't the focus of the event that you're speaking at. I know we all appreciate that who've worked on this issue for a long time. We're so lucky to have you as our First Lady, and we're proud to work with you on this issue among many others. And also huge thanks to Charmaine as well. Your leadership in women's issues goes far beyond chairing the Women's Policy and Research Commission, though that's where I've spent most of my time with you. To know you is to love you, and we're grateful to get to work with you on so many projects that benefit women and their families in Louisiana. So now we're going to shift into some level setting. So give me a second and let me see if I can stop share and then reshare my screen in just a moment. Well, let's see. All right, are y'all seeing my screen? I can't see faces. So T, if you want to come off mute and just let me know if we're good.
Yes. We're good, Amanda.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Summer. All right, everybody. So I think you've been sufficiently welcomed, but I'm happy to say it again. This event is hosted by the Office on Women's Policy, the Office of the First Lady, and the LSU Women's Center. And you've already heard from our beautiful First Lady, and you'll hear from Summer Stibe with the Women's Center in just a second. So I want to tell you really briefly about the Office on Women's Policy. So the Office on Women's Policy is housed within the governor's office. It was created in statute many, many years ago. And the job is really to keep a pulse on the top issues issues that are impacting women in Louisiana and their potential solutions. So I had the real pleasure to serve as the director of the Office on Women's Policy for the last couple of years. I've just recently left that position to accept a position in child welfare, which is where I've spent most of my career. But I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to still see through this event. And of course, we'll continue to work on this issue no matter where I am. So this is, let's see. All right, this is our agenda for today. The Zoom link is going to be live all day, and so you come in and out as you would like to. Hopefully you're able to join us for the whole day. We would love that. But we really now are going to do a really quick look, like 15-minute look at what the data is, and then we're going to dive into these kind of focus sessions where you'll get to explore our opportunities really to solve this problem at the individual level, at the employer level, and at the policymakers level. So come in and out, the link should still work. And if you have any trouble, if you email us at womenspolicy@la.gov, we should be able to work with you to get you back in. Okay. So when I started in the governor's office, I really had to take a deep dive in this and study this issue. It was, as the first lady said, and continues to be a high priority for the governor. But honestly, it was pretty new to me. I feel like I'm outing myself here with all of my colleagues, but I'm a registered Republican and I was not involved in any women's advocacy groups. I still think this is largely true, that this is an issue that isn't talked about a whole lot outside of advocacy groups and Democratic circles. And then also, if I'm being honest, I think I assumed that people were really saying that this whole wage gap was attributed to discrimination. And I just really didn't want to believe that. I'm an eternal optimist. I didn't want to believe that we had this huge disparity in earnings simply because women thought, or because people thought that women, were not capable of doing as good a work as men or something like that. I think I was also really confused because this data here on the screen is what we tend to show when we talk about equal pay for equal work. But honestly, this data is not really representing equal work. This is like saying me, who works full-time year-round, and my husband, who works full-time year-round, are apples to apples. And so that was really confusing for me, and I had to pull it all apart. So what you're looking at here is the median earnings for all women working full-time year-round versus the same for all men working full-time year-round. So I thought, okay, as a whole, I get that, but men and women tend to work really different jobs. So does that explain it? But what I found is that when you break it down in different ways, by race, by age, by education, by occupation, and so on, the wage gap really varies dramatically. But the bottom line is that in every group, in every way that you break this down, women still earn less money than their male counterparts. The gender pay gap actually varies pretty wildly by parish too. I don't have that data to share with you on the screen, but for example, women in Catahoula Parish earn about 50% of what males earn, versus women earning 97% of what males earn in East Carroll Parish. But we really can't get excited about that 97%, honestly, because East Carroll Parish is one of the poorest parishes in an extremely poor state. And that number really tells me that men and women are both probably earning terrible wages. And that honestly, a lot of them are probably earning minimum wage, and everybody is equal at minimum wage. So anyway, we're going to dive much deeper into this today. We're going to learn about what's really behind the numbers and what we can do about it. I also want to point out that we are 49th of all states and the District of Columbia for the earnings of women compared to men. And I know you're probably thinking, who else is behind us other than Mississippi? But let me tell you, you're wrong. Mississippi is better than us. It's actually Utah and Wyoming that are behind us. Mississippi is ranked 41. Women in Mississippi earn 77 cents for every dollar earned by white men. And also, as dismal as it sounds that Louisiana women are earning 72% of what men are earning, look at the numbers for women of color. And the First Lady pointed this out earlier. It's really astonishing. 49 cents for Black women, 53 cents for Latina women. It makes my heart hurt, especially when you think about all of the additional burdens that women of color face. So zooming back out to the national figures, here's another tidbit. If you account for women who work part-time or spend some amount of time across their career out of the workforce, the earnings gap across a 15-year period is 51%, meaning that women earn only 49% of what men do across that 15-year period. So this is the kind of the whole forest view, but now we're going to look closer at some of the trees. So this graphic was taken from a really comprehensive report from the American Association of University Women. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely take a look at it. What this shows is the breakdown by age. So this is national data. You can see that the wage gap is the lowest right out of college. Women are earning about 88–90% of what men are earning. And then when we get to the childbearing ages, it starts to widen. And then it hits an all-time low near retirement. Here's another kicker. Due to the lower wages women earn throughout their working years, women actually receive less than men do from Social Security and other benefits like disability and life insurance. Plus, we live longer. So that means we have to stretch those dollars across a longer period of time, and we're more likely to spend our retirement years in poverty. This data is from the National Women's Law Center. It's astonishing today, $586,320 across a 40-year career. And then we can look at it by education. So the wage gap exists regardless of education level, and women actually earn more college and graduate degrees than men. From 1970 to 2017, the proportion of women ages 25 to 64 in the labor force who held a college degree nearly quadrupled. But in that same amount of time, it basically doubled for men. And today, women earn about 57% of all bachelor's degrees. About 25% of women aged 25 and older in Louisiana have a bachelor's degree or higher, which is an increase of 6 percentage points in the last 20 years. But you can see here that women with a master's degree working full-time year-round are paid just 75 cents for every dollar paid to men with master's degree who work the same schedule. So then we can look at it over time. So I'll give you a second to get your bearings on this one. The red line is overall, black is white women, blue is Black women, and orange is Hispanic women. This is another AAUW graphic from an update to the report that I mentioned earlier. So most of the progress towards gender equality took place in like the 80s and 90s. In the past 10 years, we've narrowed by less than 1 percentage point. The rates of change have been a lot slower since 2001. Starting in about 2000, the labor force participation rate for women has kind of plateaued. In Louisiana, Black women have the highest labor force participation rate at about 60%. And in the past, men really tended to have more education, training, work experience, all of that than women. But as women have really gotten into that game, their earnings have risen and it has narrowed the gap. So using the 15-year data in the period from 2001 to 2015, men still brought home twice as much as women did. But in the 60s to 80s time period, they actually brought home about 5 times more. So the landscape has definitely changed through the years. So if we step away from the data for a second and talk about women as members of a household, about a quarter of all family households, so those that have children present, are headed by a single woman. If you look at single parent households by themselves, 76% of them are headed by women. And of course, they're working. Unmarried mothers are more likely to participate in the labor force than married moms. But regardless of marital status, women are the primary or the sole breadwinners in 40 to 50% of households, depending on what data source you use. The labor force participation rate in Louisiana is pretty much on par with that for the US. It's around 67%. We're actually about 0.5 percentage point better than the US average there. And then given all the data we've looked at so far, it really comes as no surprise that women are more likely to live in poverty than men. So we've heard that COVID created a she session. This chart was provided by the Louisiana Workforce Commission. So look at the 10% jump in unemployment claims for women once the pandemic hit. And it's actually really gotten worse as of late. We know that women are more likely to work in low-wage jobs and in careers like leisure and hospitality, which was the hardest hit sector in the pandemic. But women also are more likely to have had to juggle those demands for childcare and work and child rearing and all of that. And many of them have dropped out of the workforce altogether to deal with school and childcare center closures. Mothers have actually had the steepest levels of unemployment. So you can see here that women did gain the majority of jobs that came back in October, which is great, but it would take 8 months of October-related growth, October-level growth, to get back to the 4.2 million jobs that were lost since February 2020. So now that we've looked at a lot of data, let's look at what drives it. In part, it's gender and racial discrimination, and it's also influenced by things like workplace harassment, which we won't be able to get in today, but deserves a lot of exploration as well. So we're going to dive into a few other causes like occupational segregation, lack of workplace policies that support family caregiving, things like that. So this slide is from the Women's Bureau within the U.S. Department of Labor, and it shows the occupations across the country that have the largest share of women workers. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about occupational segregation. Women tend to cluster in occupations that have relatively low wages, which, side note, we could have a whole additional summit on what we need to do to address the fact that work is undervalued. They tend to have degrees leading to lower paying occupations than men. They tend to have shorter work histories and take more time off from work for childbirth and childcare. Women also tend to look for flexible work schedules, less stressful environments, and other conditions that allow them to juggle family responsibilities. They're also more likely than men to work part-time. About a quarter of all female wage and salary workers in 2017 worked part-time. And all of those factors influence a woman's career path from the beginning, where we see a lot more women funneling into lower paid jobs. And as I mentioned earlier, even within equal work, there still isn't equal pay. Here's a look from the US Department of Labor. So they looked at 316 different occupations and explored the gender pay gap. The industry with the largest gender wage gap was finance and insurance, where women earned about 70% of men's earnings, which is a 30% wage gap. And occupations with better gender wage ratios were like dietitians, counselors, nurse practitioners. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but here's the equal mark, the dollar. So it's only these couple at the top where we saw pay parity. And here's another view, the gap by industry brought to us by Pay Scale. I like this one because it looks at the uncontrolled gap and the controlled gap. So the red dots represent the uncontrolled gender pay gap, and that ranges from about 78% in finance and insurance to about 96% in arts, entertainment, and recreation. The blue dots are the controlled gender pay gap, and that means the researchers controlled for the same job and qualifications. So if you see here, the dollar mark is all the way on the end, and you see we only had 2 of them basically that hit that mark. So when we look at equal pay for equal work, the gap gets a whole lot smaller, but it only really disappeared in those 2 sectors that I showed you, which were technology and engineering and science. But even in those 2 sectors, if you look at the difference between the red dot and the blue dot, so here and here, that tells us that women are still clustered in really low-level jobs within these industries. Another issue is career progression. So this research is from McKinsey & Company. Women are less likely to reach the highest paying leadership and executive positions. So research shows that we tend to overestimate men's performance and underestimate women's. Men are often hired and promoted based on their potential, but women are often hired and promoted based on their track record. Women, especially women of color, receive less support from managers than men do. Women get less access to senior leaders, and these are the people who create opportunities. These are the people who open doors. So lack of access puts women at a disadvantage. Women are less likely to be hired into manager level jobs, and they're far less likely to be promoted into them. For every 100 men promoted to manager, only 79 women are. So men end up holding about 62% of manager positions, and women hold only about 38%. Only about 1 in 5 C-suite leaders is a woman, and only 1 in 25 is a woman of color. And a good example of this is on the nonprofit side. Women make up 75% of the nonprofit workforce, but just 22% of chief executives of nonprofits that have annual budgets of 50 million or more. And finally, we need to look at caregiving. These slides again come from AAUW. About 43% of women workers had at least 1 year with no earnings. That's at least twice the rate of men, according to the Institute for Women's Policy Research. The penalties for taking time out of the workforce are really high. Data that looked at wages between 2001 and 2015 showed that women who took just 1 year off from work had annual earnings 39% lower than women who worked all 15 of those years. Childcare issues are also affecting moms in the workforce. Half of US families report difficulty finding childcare. Women often make job decisions based on childcare considerations rather than in the interest of their financial situation or their career goals. Slightly more than half of respondents in a Center for American Progress survey who identified as homemakers said that they would look for a job if they had access to more affordable childcare. And a third of parents in part-time jobs said they would work more hours if they had more affordable and reliable childcare. Having children limits parents from advancing in their career. When the Pew Research Center analyzed census data, they found that about 1 in 5 working parents, including 23% of working moms and 15% of working dads, say that they have turned down a promotion because they were balancing work and parenting responsibilities. And another study found that 17% say they've been passed over for an important assignment, and 16% say they've been passed over for a promotion because they have children. Mothers are more likely than fathers to report each of those experiences. So that all brings us back here. This is looking at the gender wage gap from the national perspective. So when we look at the median annual earnings for both men and women, like on my first slide, there's an 18% gap. When we control for the same jobs and qualifications, it shrinks, but there's still a gap. So this study pegs that unexplained gap at 2%, but I have seen plenty of other studies that peg it as high as 38%. And this is the portion of the gap that we have to attribute to things like discrimination. And even at 2%, it's still significant. For someone making $50,000 a year, 2% is $1,000. And there's a lot that you can do to support your family with $1,000. The bottom line is it's high time for us to fix this, and there's a myriad of ways that we can address it. Policies such as paid family leave, available to and used by both men and women, would help, as would public subsidies for childcare while parents work. We also need to support workers who are caring for aging parents, because we will spend a lot more of our working years with older parents than we do raising young children. Only 15% of workers receive paid parental leave. This can help women stay connected to the workforce and encourage men to take on more of the caregiving responsibilities. We can invest in childcare. Paying for childcare can be impractical or impossible for parents with low incomes who are disproportionately women. We can look at ways to get women into higher paying fields. Even with women who have an interest in STEM fields, we see some that pursue a degree in STEM, but they don't end up working a career in STEM. And so we need to get to the bottom of that. As far as the roles we each play, women can push for better wages. Training programs are available that help women successfully negotiate salary and benefits, and that's next up on our agenda today. We're going to get trained in salary negotiation from Summer Stibe with the LSU Women's Center, and I can't wait to hear that. Employers can improve morale and performance by analyzing wage data, by conducting pay audits, by prohibiting retaliation against employees for talking about their wages, and eliminating the practice of using prior salary history to set wages for new employees. Companies can also make progress by targeting women in recruitment, making sure that hiring and promotions are fair, making senior leaders and managers champions of diversity, fostering an inclusive and respectful workplace culture, making the only experience rare, so being the only woman in the room or the only person of color in the room, and offering employees the flexibility to fit work into their lives. Those really fantastic tips come from McKinsey & Company. They do an excellent annual report called Women in the Workplace. And then finally, government. Government can pass laws that support pay equity, as well as create systems for paid parental leave, fund early childhood education, and improve access to high quality, affordable childcare. I'm excited for the rest of the day because we're going to focus really on all of these solutions based on these three perspectives, from the role for individuals to employers to policymakers. And so enough about data. It's time for us to get to that good stuff. And as I said earlier, we encourage you to participate in the full day if you're able. We'll have a few big breaks so you can stretch, eat, take care of emails and things like that. And the Zoom link will be open all day, so just pop in and out as you're able. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and transition us into the next section, which give me a second because my controls have disappeared. I need to find the other PowerPoint and get it pulled back up. Let's see. Share screen, number 2. All right, are y'all seeing Summer's picture?
Here I am.
Okay, well, give me a second. Oh, shoot. How did I do that?
There I'm not now.
Yep, there you're not. Hold on. For some reason,
They saw me and they're gonna see me. Just
okay, hold on. You know, my biggest problem is that my controls disappear again and again. Okay, are you seeing Summer again now?
I'm back.
All right, good deal. Let's see. Okay, we are now going to hear from Summer Stibe, the director of the LSU Women's Center, on the role for individuals, which is going to be a salary negotiation workshop. So I want to tell you about Summer. Summer Stibe is the director of the Women's Center at Louisiana State University, and as part of her duties as director of the LSU Women's Center, Summer serves on the University Council on Gender Equity, serves on the CARES team, is a member of the Pregnancy and Parenting Program Committee, a confidential supporter, and co-chair of the National Coalition Building Institute at LSU. Summer developed LSU's bias incident response procedures and chaired the bias incident resource team from its creation in 2016 to 2021. Summer is a member of Mayor President Sharon Weston Broom's Women's Advancement Commission and serves on the board of directors for the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. She's also a sustaining member of the Junior League of Baton Rouge, where she's twice served as the sustaining advisor to the Diversity and Cultural Inclusion Committee. And she currently serves on the DEI Professionals Work Group for the Association of Junior Leagues International. So y'all help me welcome Summer. I'm going to stop my share too, Summer, so that I think you have a presentation
I
to share.
do.
There you go.
Thank you, Amanda. Let me go ahead and get my presentation set up to go. Are y'all seeing my screen?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Well, thank you so much to Amanda and First Lady Edwards and Charmaine and everyone who's worked together to bring this workshop together. We actually started this work in collaboration between the Women's Center and the Governor's Office on Women's Policy in 2020, before our world changed dramatically when Amanda and I collaborated on an equal pay mural that's in downtown Baton Rouge. And from that, we've continued conversations about the wage gap and ways that we can address it. And Amanda and I were on a call together in the spring. And one of the things that came out from that was the need to really look holistically at wage gaps within our state and what we can do. And so a lot is kind of put on individuals to negotiate, and that's what we're going to talk about, but then also looking at the role of employers and policy. So a lot of work and planning has gone into this, and excited that all of you are joining us here today. So the last time I did this presentation was literally the day before we shut down for the pandemic, and a whole lot has changed in the past 20 months. And Amanda talked some about that, as did First Lady Edwards, looking at women leaving the workforce during the pandemic and the types of work that women are engaged in. We're currently in the Great Resignation, and we're going to talk about how that may impact and where people are in their careers, and how that's something that can potentially be leveraged as well. All right. So there we go. All right, so we're going to look at the scope of the issue, and this is going to be some repeat of information that you've heard. It may be framed in a little bit different way, but I think this information is so critically important to understanding the issue that there's value in hearing it multiple times. So again, AAUW just put out their 2021 report, The Simple Truth. It's something that they do annually. AAUW really is nationally leading the work for looking at wage gaps, exposure and education, but then also policy and implementation on ways that we can shrink that. So if you see here, whenever you look at data for 2020, the wage gap is about 83%. As we share, Louisiana is 72%. We're 74th in the US right now in terms of the overall gender wage gap. However, there's a caveat there whenever you look at that 83%. And so what the research is showing is that that 83% is not fully reflective of women who left the workforce due to the pandemic. So while we're seeing 83% in the data for 2021, it's anticipated that there's going to be a backlash, and that we're going to see an increase in the gender wage gap as we move out of the pandemic, and as pandemic data is factored into looking at that annual research. So it's been shared before that the wage gap has impacts across the spectrum, but also has impacts specifically based on intersections of gender and race and ethnic identity. And so again, here's information from AAUW that's been gone over before, but it looks specifically at wage gaps based on various identities that folks have as compared to the earnings of white men. Whenever we look at occupations where women collectively lose the most money, we saw this with the information that Amanda shared with financial managers and lawyers, chief executives. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more whenever we look at sex stratification within employment, and what that looks like and how that impacts wage gaps within the same general type of occupation. And then again, gaps, the smallest gaps that we look at as well. So just wanted to share that information and kind of framework as we move forward. As Amanda shared, women are paid less than men at every educational level. And you see this here in the graph. And if you look down here, women with advanced degrees are earning less than men with college degrees. So we know that getting education and advanced degrees will help to increase earnings for individuals, but it doesn't necessarily contribute overall to the closing of the wage gap. So some contributing factors, we've talked about sex segregation. So men and women tend to do different jobs, and often those jobs align with traditional gender roles. And we know that jobs that are saturated with women tend to be valued less and paid less. Sex stratification, it's when men and women are positioned differently within the same occupational field. And so if you look, again, if you think back to that slide where there's the biggest wage gap and you look at attorneys and what type of law do you see women focusing in as opposed to where do you see men tend to focus within that career. So sex stratification looks at even within the same large occupational group, how women and men are situated in that is different. We also, there's the phenomenon of occupational feminization and racialization. So as women and people of color move into various occupations, the pay, prestige, and power within those tends to decrease. One of the other factors to look at and consider is unpaid labor, or what's called office housework. So women are often tasked with doing things in their job that don't necessarily align with what they're being paid to do in their job description. So doing things like organizing holiday parties or inventory. I did this presentation for a group of women in Louisiana, and I had someone who was a pharmacist. And if you think back to that slide, a couple of slides ago, pharmacists have one of the smallest gender wage gaps. And so she was sharing about how she's a pharmacist and they have one of the lowest gender wage gaps. And I was like, that's great. I was like, but what do you do and what are you asked to do that your male colleagues are not asked to do? And she stopped and she realized that there were things that she was asked and expected to do that she wasn't getting paid for, that wasn't taken into consideration with her annual evaluation, that her male colleagues weren't asked to do. And it may not sound like a lot, but even if someone is doing 12 minutes a day of unpaid labor, this office housework, it comes out to about $1,500 a year. So while the pay was the same, the expectation of the type of work and the work hours was vastly different. This particular friend ended up having a conversation with her boss about it. And ended up actually leaving her position over this, even though, again, there wasn't necessarily a wage gap, but there was a work expectation that was very different there. And we see that for a lot of women. And then we also have the phenomenon of the broken rung and the glass escalator. And so the broken rung is where women are brought in often at lower levels and are passed over for a first promotion. So as Amanda shared in her presentation, AAUW has demonstrated and research has shown that the wage gap is the smallest right whenever you're entering the workforce. But again, we also know that women are often passed up for that first promotion. So that kind of sets that wage gap in place and it makes it harder to catch up down the line. And then the glass escalator is sort of the inverse of that, where men are often fast-tracked into promotions, into other opportunities that aren't available to women and or people of color. All right, so what can you do? We've kind of set the stage. So I used to participate and get trained in various salary negotiation steps and workshops, and it was very, very complex, and I felt overwhelmed by it. And I know from talking to other people that they often feel incredibly overwhelmed by even how do you do it? It seems so complicated. But after participating in workshops and really doing a lot of study and research around this, I think it boils down to 3 steps. And so that's what we're really going to spend the rest of our time here together talking about. So what are those 3 steps and what do they look like in action? So the first step is figuring out, what do you need? What is your budget? What can you handle? What can you, not what's aspirational, but figuring out like kind of what's your bottom line. So what do you need to live, to survive, to do the things you need to do? And then thinking about doing the things that you want to do, thinking about saving for retirement and vacation. And if you have children, their educational needs and all of those things. And then doing a self-assessment and figuring out, what is your value? What are the things that you bring? And then looking at market research to figure out, what are you worth? And so we're going to delve into each one of these in a lot more detail. So again, what do you need? So making a budget. So I know we don't have the icon features, but how many of you think about, have your own budget? How many of you know what percentage of your income is going to the various expenses that you have? And there's a lot of free budgeting tools out there, websites. This is just a quick screenshot sample of some of the bills and expenses that we have. There are also things called cost of living calculator. So as you're thinking about entering a career or a job change, looking for new employment, looking at, are you going to be staying where you are, or are you going to be moving into a market that has a higher cost of living? So things to consider as you think about your own individual needs and what it is and where you're going within your career. Looking at not only this budget calculator and figuring that out, but looking at a cost of living calculator as well. So I work on a college campus with college students. And one of the things that folks often don't think about when budgeting is student loans, right? So you're in school, you want your degree, that's your goal, and that's an amazing goal. But unfortunately, we don't always support students in a way that fully allows them to get an education without taking out student loans. And now we see the cost of college skyrocketing across the US. And so it's not uncommon to have $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in debt, in student loan debt for an undergraduate degree. And that doesn't even factor in graduate school or professional school. So whenever I specifically work with students and people that are looking to launch kind of those first careers, thinking about student loans and what you can expect to repay with that. So again, just another thing to consider, another thought, that's something we don't always think about, particularly when we're at the beginning of our careers. So another budgeting consideration is looking at housing. So we know right now, particularly in Louisiana, because of hurricanes and other factors, that there's a real housing boom. It is a seller's market right now, and that's for purchasing a home, but even looking at rent. This was data that I pulled, and this is a 1-bedroom apartment in various cities across the US. And I actually think that this $990 for Baton Rouge is pretty low. And so when you look at kind of budgeting and how you should be budgeting, your housing cost should be no more than about 30% of your salary. So taking that into consideration as you're thinking about, what's your bottom line and what is it that you need in order to not only survive, but to thrive in your job. Yeah, $2,395 for New York. All right, so then thinking about what's your value? So what is it that you bring? What makes you unique as a person and as a professional? And how do you best market that so you become a sought after candidate for a new position and you become viewed as a valuable team member in your current position? So if you're looking for a new job and thinking about, what's your value? So what's the totality of what you bring to a new job and how is it reflected on your resume? So we know that the way that people look for jobs and get jobs now has changed dramatically. And a big part of that is engaging in online, right? So whether it's Indeed or Glassdoor or LinkedIn, making sure that your resume has keywords in it that are matching the job descriptions for the positions that you're going for. So you want to make sure that your experience and your competencies are reflected in the language being used in the job post that you're interested in. And that's because these companies have software that use algorithms that look at your work experience and they match up keywords. So if you're not having the right words, if you're not having the right competencies, and if you're not using the right terminology, you may not even show up in a search for a position that you want. A lot of companies, and particularly larger companies, are doing the same thing with screening resumes and applications that come in. So it's not even just at the matching process, but it's also at the hiring process as well. So if you haven't done a resume review, if you haven't done a resume update, it's something that I encourage everyone to do every couple of years. Look at your current job and a current job description for what you're doing, and seeing if your terminology is relevant. Is your terminology matching up? And then thinking about your next steps and where you want to go, and how can you think about ways that you can frame what you're doing to better match what it is that you're seeing as your next step. So for professional experience, thinking about internship opportunities, volunteer experiences. We know that a lot of times, particularly women, when they're not in the paid workforce, they are volunteering. And so how do you include and leverage that volunteer experience as experience, even though it is not paid experience? What leadership experiences do you bring? What soft skills, professional, are you bringing to the table? And then who are your connections and your networks? Who can you have ready-made contacts and connections with? And then also thinking about how can you use your connections and your networks as references? So how can you make sure that whenever you have references that you've actually had a conversation with them about what you've done, so that they get a full picture? So it's not just Summer's great and she's amazing, but they're actually able to demonstrate to a potential employer the value that you have the ability to bring to a position. So all of those things are going to factor in whenever you move into that actual negotiation component of either a search, an annual evaluation, ask for a pay raise. So for folks also that are currently employed, so maybe you're looking for a promotion, you're looking for a pay increase. What's the totality of your contributions on your current job? What are you getting evaluated for? And are you getting evaluated annually, first of all? And if you are, is what you're being evaluated on a reflection of what it is that you're actually doing? So thinking about your years of experience, thinking about your demonstrated outcomes, whatever that may be in your particular field. Other duties as assigned. So what is it that you're doing that's not necessarily part of your job description, but that's adding value to your company, your organization, and how do you leverage that? How do you articulate that in a way? What new skills and certification have you gained? So maybe you came in and you didn't have certain skills or certain certifications and you do now. And so that's a great place and a great way to start a conversation about looking at advancement. And then again, what connections and networks have you brought in? Do you have that you're able to leverage to support you individually, but then also thinking about ways that that can support your company, your organization, etc. How many of folks, and y'all can maybe answer just in the chat, have an updated resume? Just kind of interested to see. And if you don't, I challenge you after today to get one. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of yeses. Good, good. Good to see that. And if not, again, this is a great opportunity for you to look into doing that and to spending some time really being introspective about what you do, particularly for those of us who are currently employed. I think sometimes we get, you know, sort of complacent in what we do every day and don't really even ourselves fully appreciate the value of what we do. So spending some time really being deliberate about that is a great opportunity for you to start getting your plan together for making that ask or for looking at new opportunities in a different company, a different field for you. So looking at resources to do that, I haven't myself been on the job market in almost 10 years, and I know that things have changed dramatically in that past 10 years, right? The way that jobs are advertised, the way that you apply for jobs, the way that resumes are screened, hiring processes. Most colleges and universities have a career center that serves students and alumni. And sometimes they'll also serve community members. So even if you didn't graduate from a university within your community, if there is a career center there reaching out, and usually there might be a nominal fee for that, but being able to go and meet with someone. There are also lots of folks who are doing career coaching. And so if you're planning to make a big ask or making a big career move, it may be worth it to invest in yourself and connect with a career coach. So some of the things to think about are resume assistance. So really having someone who is up to date on the trends, the technology, to look over what it is that you have to make sure that you are marketing yourself in a way that is a true reflection of everything that you bring. They can do mock interviews, they can help you with market research, and then negotiation role plays, right? So we know that the more times we do something, the more comfortable we get with it. And so if we've never negotiated before, it can be really scary and really uncomfortable. And so having someone who can role play with you and who can help you really hone those skills, I think is critically important. Yes, thank y'all for sharing in the chat. So then how do you start thinking about and determining what it is that you are worth? And there's various ways to do that. So now there are lots of companies and websites that have aggregated salary data and information based on specific markets. So you can go to someplace like salary.com or Glassdoor and put in kind of a job title, years of experience, and they can give you a report about what a range looks like, a high-end range and a low-end range. And some of them are more sophisticated than others. Most of them, without signing up and without a fee, you can get base information. Sometimes if you do sign up for a service, you can get more in-depth information about a particular market or particular position and looking at the salary. There are also trade publications that do salary studies based on specific industries. So again, I work in higher ed. Higher ed jobs has a ton of information out there specifically about jobs within higher education. So while I can maybe go to salary.com and get some general information, something that is specific to my industry may have a lot more in-depth information. They may have job titles that I can't find on one of these larger kind of generalized services like a salary.com or a Glassdoor. So I encourage folks to go to one of these sites and put in what you're making now or what your job is now and see where you fall within the range, and then do some research and see if your industry has something that's more specific to what it is that you are doing. So this is from salary.com, and it shows you, again, a range. I did English professor in Baton Rouge just because, again, I'm working at a university. And it shows you here, you can look and see the median is about 85,000. And then it shows you what that range looks like. And then you can put in additional information here. So things that may impact how you're paid. So your education, direct reports, years of experience, those types of things. So this is just a sample of one of the reports that is there. And yes, that is a great point that Tina just shared, that if you work for the state, you can get a salary report. So those of us who are state employees, our salaries are part of public record. And so you can. I know LSU Libraries has they keep a database of the salaries of everyone who's paid with state funds here at LSU. So that is another great resource that you just shared. So thank you for that. So yes, and we have somebody from LSU Libraries who just shared they keep a copy of that at the Access Service Desk here. So, but looking at, again, this is a great way to help you determine what your worth is and what kind of your range that you should be asking for whenever you do go in for negotiations. This is a report, a sample from higher ed jobs. So it's specific to, again, the types of universities that somebody may be at, but the information, it's much more specific in nature. So you may not be able on salary.com to get a mailing coordinator in higher education. That may be too specific for a generalized thing, but looking at something that does have that specificity may really help you to zero in and then demonstrate whenever you make that ask what the data is showing. So then looking at your range, whenever you negotiate, you should always have a range in mind. So what is on your lower end? That lower end should always be more than what your minimum budget is, because you have to be able to survive. And then looking at what's kind of on your upper end, your reach that you want it to potentially go for. And looking at, thinking back to something like this report or this report to help you determine what it is that you should have in mind for your range as you move forward with making your ask. So doing some additional research, right? Because jobs aren't just salary. That's not the only consideration that you should be looking at. So thinking about things like insurance benefits. I'm currently working at LSU and our insurance is amazing. The state of Louisiana has great insurance as well. So if that's something that is important to you and your family, particularly based on your circumstances, something to think about. Do they offer 401ks, retirement matches, those types of things? What does the leave look like? Are there professional development opportunities? Are there opportunities to get mentoring? Certifications within certain fields, having certifications is critical to advancing your career. So is that something that you can think about as you're looking at negotiating? And then moving and relocation packages as well. And then also thinking about those intangible things. What's the company culture look like? So is there flexibility in schedule? How long do employees stay at this company or this corporation? What do promotion opportunities look like? And would employees recommend the company as a great place to work? So as you're looking at your negotiation and what it is that you want and what it is that you're asking for, thinking beyond just pen to paper numbers and salary, but the totality of what that experience may look like for you. I did see somebody had their hand raised. I don't know that we're able to like necessarily call on folks, but if you had a question, you can drop it in the chat and I'll do my best to answer it. All right, so now the scary part, right? So how do you make the ask? So hopefully you've made your budget, you've done that introspective work, you've done your research work, and now you are prepared to go in and either do an initial negotiation if it's a job offer for a new position, or you're going in to ask for a raise, a promotion, etc. So knowing exactly what it is that you're asking for. So as you're going through those 3 steps before your ask, having a really clear picture of what it is that you are asking for. Are you asking for a specific salary? Are you asking for a percent increase? Are you asking for a job title change? What would you be open to accepting? Is it reasonable, right? So if we think back to that slide a few slides ago with the English professor where the median salary is $85,000, if you go in asking for 125, which is at the very top end, is that really reasonable? Now, if you can completely back that up, then that may be reasonable. But if you go in to negotiate with a salary range and with other asks that aren't reasonable, there's a good chance that you won't be taken seriously and that it could either damage your opportunity and ability to move forward in a process or to move forward in your current position. So negotiation is not always without risk, but whenever you are clear on what you're asking for and it's reasonable and it's supported by research, it's often very successful. So the supported by research is, can you go to that market research? Can you look at what other people are being paid with similar experience, similar degrees, similar certifications, and a similar same market, and say, this is what I've found to be true. Some companies you can access their actual pay records, and that's not always an opportunity that everybody has. And then making the ask. So outline what it is that you bring, what makes you uniquely qualified, particularly if this is for a new position. Keeping it about you, that's especially true if you're asking for a raise. So not letting kind of outside noise or chatter influence that conversation that you're going to have specifically about you, what you bring to the table, how you enhance the value of your company and your organization, and why it is that you need and deserve an increase. Stick to the facts. So trying not to make it about feelings, but really what do the facts show, what's demonstrated in the data. Ask about a follow-up timeline. I think this is really important for those of us who are currently employed. A lot of times we will have conversations with our supervisors or whoever makes those decisions about salary and position, and it's like, okay, I'll get back with you on that, but there's no firm timeline in place. And so it kind of just, it snowballs and it doesn't happen and it doesn't get addressed, and you keep working and maybe resentment builds up. And so being, asking about what's the timeline for follow-up. So I've shared this information with you. Here's my ask. What's a reasonable expectation of when I can hear back from you? And then consider if you're willing to accept non-monetary benefits. So again, certifications, professional development, attending conferences, a title change. Is that something that you can negotiate for with or without a reevaluation of salary? And then other considerations that may be important to you. Again, research has shown that sometimes negotiations backfire on women due to stereotypes and double bind. So just being cognizant of that, but hopefully you will you'll start to feel empowered in making an ask and being very strategic about how you make an ask and what needs to be included in the ask and what work you need to do before to get you to that place. So after the ask, taking some time for yourself to evaluate what's been offered, and then making a decision, right? So are you going to accept the offer that's been made? Or are you going to renegotiate? Are you going to go back and say, you know, I appreciate that first offer. Is there any room to move on maybe these things? So maybe it's not salary, but maybe it's negotiating for one of those non-salary factors that we talked about. Or are you going to decline the offer and see what happens from there? So walking away from a job offer, so looking first and foremost, what does your budget say? So if you've negotiated and somebody's come back lower than your budget, is that really something that you can afford to do? Looking at things like, is there an opportunity for an increase after a probationary period? So if you've negotiated and they've said, this is where we can come in right now, can you counter that and say, well, after a 6-month probationary period, can we revisit this? Is that an opportunity for me? Do you have other offers? So if you have multiple offers, then you certainly can leverage that. You certainly are in a position to be a little choosier about what it is that you take and what's really important to you. How long have you been on the market? So how long have you been looking for a job? Are there growth opportunities? So if you take this position, maybe it's not exactly aligning with what you want, but are there opportunities for growth and advancement within that company, within that field, that have been outlined in a way that looks like it is reasonable and attainable to you? And then how are the benefits? So do the benefits maybe balance the scales where the salary is a little bit less than you were wanting, or on the lower end of your range? So things to consider as you get those offers and you're determining what your next steps are. So somebody did ask a question about, can you speak further on women getting offers rescinded? I have not myself seen statistics about it. I've certainly seen anecdotal evidence. I've had people share their personal stories with me, and then there are some articles about women who have gone in and asked and negotiated either on the front end of a new job offer or within an existing job, who have had either offers rescinded or what they felt was maybe retaliation for making the ask. I have not heard of anyone who has really been very thoughtful and strategic about their negotiation, has been reasonable in what they're asking for, have negative consequences. But again, that is all speaking from my experience and from anecdotal experience that I've seen. If anybody who is either participating as a panelist or as a participant does have any further information for that, I invite you to share it in the chat. Yeah, and y'all are bringing up the issue of pay transparency, and as I believe Amanda and Ms. Edwards talked about, that that's one of those policy things that we're trying to work on at the state level, right? Is having pay transparency. So if you don't know that you're not being paid what other people in your company or corporation are being paid for, it's challenging to negotiate for an increase and using your real life lived experiences for that. So yeah. So if you have an existing job and thinking about walking away, so how do you feel about your job? Like, does it bring you joy? Do you feel fulfilled in what you do? Or have you reached that point where maybe you're burned out? You've given what you've given, and it's time to really think about your next steps and what opportunities are waiting for you. How easily can you get another job? Are you in a sector that it's fairly easy to find another job, to get something that is a step up for you. Will a new job pay more? So are you looking at making a lateral move, or is it important for you to make a move that advances your career in terms of pay, position, title, etc.? How are the benefits? So if you leave a job that pays $3,000 more a year, but you lose that in lack of benefits, is that overall a positive thing for you and your family and your career? Will your new job require a move? Some people are looking to move, and so that's really exciting. Some people are not in a position where they can move. Will a new position, again, will it advance your career, a new job? And are there other intangible things to consider? So whenever I talk about jobs and work, I really encourage folks to think holistically about culture, about benefits, about colleagues, opportunities. So things beyond just looking at the salary that so much of these conversations around wage gaps and negotiations are based on. And then make your plan. I think you do your legwork in advance. So you build a plan, and then it's, I think, critically important to practice. So if you've engaged the services of a career coach, practicing what it is that you're going to ask. How is this negotiation going to go? How are you going to respond if X, Y, or Z happens within the process? If you don't have a career coach, do you have a mentor? Is there someone, a colleague, a friend who you trust, who has maybe successfully negotiated before, who can tell you about their experiences and who you can practice with? So the more confident that you feel, the more that you have really thought out and planned and done the practice and the role play, I think the better your chances for success are in doing that negotiation. So I did see a question, advice for negotiation. Yeah, it's hard to negotiate after you've accepted a position. And so being mindful of kind of when negotiation should happen. So hopefully you have an idea of what salary is being offered on the front end. I know here at LSU, for whatever reason, we do not publish what the salary is for a particular position. So you would have to talk to a hiring manager or somebody in HR to get that information on the front end. So you can get some information there. But really the time and the place to negotiate for a new position is whenever you get the offer. If you have an existing position, you've accepted it, there may be an opportunity whenever you're setting goals. So hopefully whenever you get a new position, you're able to meet with your supervisor and you have a clear understanding of what your goals are, and that there's an opportunity to do check-ins at 30, 60, and 90 days. And so there may be an opportunity there for you to say, if I meet or exceed these goals, are there opportunities to revisit my salary package? Is there an opportunity to maybe have a conversation about professional development, certifications, a change in title? But ideally, those are conversations that you would have kind of between getting an offer and accepting an offer of employment. So, and let's see, I'm just trying to go through and make sure I'm not missing any questions that folks have. These presentations are so hard to do on Zoom, and so I appreciate y'all being flexible with me. Normally this is a much more interactive presentation, but with our format today, we'll manage it, it looks like, here through the chat. Yeah, I'm just making sure when you leave a job. So there's a question about fair pay, and do you still put him on your resume? I am not a career coach, so that may be, if we do have any career coaches here, they may want to hop in with that. I think all relevant experience should be reflected on your resume, and that you should be able to hopefully use that as a leverage point with whatever your next move is within your career. Yeah, so some folks are sharing their personal experiences. Yeah, so that's a great question too. How do you recommend going about researching salary when your titles are non-traditional? So a couple of different things with that. I think you can do some keyword searches and see what job titles come up. So thinking about what is it that you actually do in your job and trying to find something that best aligns with that. And you may have to do a little bit more research, right? So you may have to look at and compare salary ranges for 3 or 4 positions and come up with an aggregate as you're looking at something that's a best reflection of what it is that you're actually doing. That's a tough one though, whenever you are doing various roles, and sometimes they have really distinct responsibilities, and how do you best kind of capture that in terms of both what it is that you're doing and contributing, and then how that aligns with salaries and what have you. Yeah, and then some folks sharing experiences that they've had with glass doors. Great advice there about how you kind of figure something out whenever you have a hybrid role. So that is what I have. We do have a couple of minutes if folks did have questions. Is there a way to ask for a raise but not price yourself out in case there are budget changes? Yeah. I think that's where you try to go to as much specificity as you can on your research. So looking at multiple sources, do your sources have information that's specific to the community that you're in? So Amanda shared during her presentation that Louisiana keeps statistics about pay broken down by parish. So even being able to maybe see where your pay falls within that, and what does it look like as a reflection of where you're living, that may be something that's beneficial for you to do as you're figuring out on your own how you can not have a range that is unrealistic in nature. Tara sharing some great advice here, so thank you for that. So so what's the key to sticking to your ground when your field is 70% male? I think that's where you have to go to data and research. Pay discrimination is not legal, but it is incredibly difficult to prove. And that's, again, thinking back to that great information that Amanda shared, whenever you control for various factors, we do see that wage gap shrinking. So making sure that you are empowered with knowledge, that you are keeping current with what are the salary trends for your position, for your location, because you may not be getting paid the same in Baton Rouge doing a position that you would be getting paid in Los Angeles or DC or New York, and presenting information that is factually based. So a lot of times folks find it hard to argue with, facts and statistics and numbers. And if you can back that up, it's not a promise that you'll necessarily have the outcome that you want, but it should certainly help to lay that foundation to get you as much as you deserve and what's right and equitable for that position. This is my contact information. If anybody would like to reach out to me, have further conversations, if you would like to look at scheduling a workshop or sharing information with either yourself, a team, an organization, I'm happy to follow up with that. And thank you all for the feedback. And I hope that this was informative, and that it helped to maybe demystify what that process looks like for negotiation, and how you can, again, really educate, inform, and empower yourself to make that ask and to do something that for a lot of us may be a really scary prospect moving forward. So with that, I think that we are moving into a break. So you can have an early lunch or some email time. And I believe that we are reconvening at noon with our fabulous panel on roles for employers.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Summer. That was fantastic. I wish that I had seen this before I ever started my career. I don't know about y'all, but I was over here with my camera, my phone, taking pictures of some of the slides that I wanted to remember and things that I wanted to go back and look at, even though, like I mentioned earlier, I just transitioned to a new job. I think it made me think of that saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. It was great information that we can all use. I also love all the stuff in the chat. So much great stuff there, y'all. Even if your questions didn't get answered, put them in there, because the rest of us are learning from you. Everybody who's been working on this issue is thinking about now new ways to talk about it or new things that we need to address. The link is going to stay live. We're going to keep the presentation open, even though, as Summer said, we'll be on a break for a little bit. So keep putting those things in the chat. You're welcome to stay and chat with each other. I saw, I think it was Tara who mentioned that she's a career coach. She's willing to help. Summer has left her contact information. So there's a lot happening there. Stay active if you have the opportunity to stick around, even though the presentation won't be live. So I am going to attempt to share my screen again and show you that we will be back at noon for the next session, which is the role for employers presentation. So everybody go get some early lunch, snack, break, check your email, that kind of thing, and we will see you in just a bit. Thanks, y'all. All right, everybody, welcome back. For those of you who were able to join us this morning, we've had a great morning so far. It's been super fun to engage with everybody in the chat too. We've seen lots of great questions. We've heard lots of great information, and I have no doubt that we're going to continue with the same theme in this Role for Employers panel. So we have a great group of panelists with us today. They'll introduce themselves in just a second, but I'm going to let you know who we're going to hear from. Let me see if I can also keep up with my slides. So in this session, you're going to hear from Dr. Mimi Singer-Lee, Executive Vice President, Chief Human Resources Officer at B1 Bank, from Dr. Christelle Slaughter, who's CEO of SSA Consultants, and from Mr. Michael Williamson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the United Way of Southeast Louisiana. And our lovely moderator for this session is Connie Nelson. Connie has spent 25 plus years within the Executive Office of the Governor. She currently serves as the Director of Finance and Administration, where she oversees the agency's $17 million budget and serves as the liaison between the Division of Administration's Office of Finance and Support and Human Resources. She has also served in numerous capacities within the Executive Office since 1992, and she's worked under the leadership of 5 governors. In her professional capacity, she functions as the chairperson of the Office of Group Benefits Estimating Conference, a member of the CPTP board, and a participant of the same task force. Connie's civic involvement includes serving as an active volunteer with the American Red Cross and the local Council on Aging. Connie attended Southern University, where she was a member of the cheerleading squad and a devoted member of the Greater Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. So welcome, panel, and Connie, thank you for being with us today. And now I'm gonna turn it over to you, Connie, and I'm gonna stop my share so that we can all see all of you.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Amanda. So before we get started, we want to introduce our panel. Amanda did say you guys' names, but right now we want you guys to share some of your wealth of information that you have with our audience. So let's start with Christelle.
Christelle. Hi, Thank you so much, Connie. Appreciate it and appreciate being invited to participate. I'm Christelle Slaughter. I'm the CEO of SSA Consultants. We're a management consulting and professional development firm located in Baton Rouge, although we work across the United States and up into Canada when we are able to travel again. And we are a firm that helps organizations to become more successful. We've done a lot of work with state agencies, parish and local governments, as well as private business and industry, focusing on things like strategic planning, leadership, compensation studies, and executive searches. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today, Connie. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, let's find out from Mimi. Tell us about you, Mimi.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Connie. Thank you so much for having me here today. And let's see, where to begin? I have been in human resources for about 22 years. And this is not a career that I always thought that I would be in, but I have enjoyed every minute of it. And it's because of the topics like we're going to be talking about today that I feel like it's a great career field that we're able to make a difference in people's lives. My doctorate is in human resource education and leadership development from LSU. And actually, many of my 22 years of human resources experience came from LSU. I worked there for most of my career, but today I am working for B1 Bank. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer. And if you're not familiar with B1 Bank, we are a Baton Rouge-based bank that we have locations all throughout Louisiana and into Texas and into Mississippi. I've done past research on work-life balance, and the funny thing about today is that I'm actually serving jury duty today. We are on break though, and the great people in the jury management office have allowed me to use their supply closet to speak to you today.
That's
you want to talk about
dedication.
balance, right?
Thank you so much, Mimi. We're glad you were able to join us today. So now, Michael, we're going to go to you and let you tell us about yourself.
Well, thanks, Connie, and I join my colleagues in thanking you for the opportunity to be with everybody today. Again, my name is Michael Williamson. I serve as President and CEO of United Way of Southeast Louisiana, serving 7 parishes in Southeast Louisiana, including Tangipahoa, Washington, St. Tammany, Orleans, Jefferson, Blackman, and St. Bernard. We are a 7-parish regional collective impact organization focused squarely on the issue of poverty and how do we help families find a place of financial stability and ultimately live out the American dream through economic prosperity. I've been here for about 12 years, 4 years as COO, in the past 8 years as CEO. We've undergone a lot of transformations just in the period that I've been here and over the history of our United Way. But like we say internally, we're not your grandfathers or your grandmother's United Way, what our grandparents grew up with. We're a very different organization, but I have a wife, Kim, who's a professional woman who works in the healthcare field, who I care deeply about, and I hope that she gets treated fairly when it comes to wages. I have 2 sons, Chance and Tucker, that I hope turn out to be great leaders and support issues around equity. And also, I'm the son of a woman that grew up working in a professional environment where she was clearly the example of where pay inequities existed, which I think certainly impacted her ability to build her own wealth. I say her own, she's happily married, but her own wealth. So pleased to be with you today and to talk about this subject and sharing what we're doing at our United Way, my thoughts.
All right, thank you all so much. So as everybody can see, we have a wealth of knowledge on this panel here today. So let's start our discussion. And I'm going to ask you guys a few questions and y'all give us y'all's professional answers to my questions. So my first question is, many employees have been proactive about reducing the wage gap. What is your experience with internal pay equity audits? And how did your organization correct any issues that illuminated? And we're going to ask Mimi to answer that question.
Yeah, I think internal audits are important parts of making sure that there is pay equity. And there's a few opportunities to do that. I know in my career, we tried to do that at least once a year. But then also when we hire individuals, when we are looking at promotions, when we're looking at pay changes, all of those give a good opportunity to stop and review exactly who those individuals are that are in not only that role, but are in comparable roles, to look at where exactly do they fall within that pay range, and making sure that those with similar experience and background are paid approximately about the same. And that really gives you a good start to it. I think pay ranges are a very helpful tool to have in place, because it does help to establish what exactly is the market, what exactly is the pay for that type of position, and then looking at it from the individual perspective of where does their skills and experience fall within that pay range. Again, I'm very much a favor of internal audits. I think that it's good for employers to do, and just, over time, things may change and shift around, especially if you have changes within the company. And I think that it gives you a good opportunity to stop and look and make adjustments as necessary.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
So our next question will be, research from the National Women's Law Center shows that today's wage gap could cost a Louisiana woman almost $500,000, which is $586,320 across a 40-year career. Relying on salary history to start wages carry forward lower wages from a previous job. What are your thoughts on banning the use of salary histories in hiring and instead having salary ranges preset as a way to narrow the pay gap? So let's get Michael to answer that one first.
Thanks again, Connie. Yeah, I think I can be really brief with my answer. Both I and the United Way of Southeast Louisiana fully support the elimination of requiring that information. It creates somewhat of a arbitrary starting point for employees, and really doesn't base a person's starting salary or wages based on what their contributions would be to the organization, their past experience or skills, competencies, their track record. And so I think those are important, questions that should be eliminated from the application process. We can focus squarely on the merits of the individual and what they can bring to the organization, and ensure that we're using data to drive those decisions.
Okay, Crystal, you want to answer that one?
Yes, Connie, thank you. I think that there are a lot of misconceptions, especially in medium and smaller organizations, about how to set wages. And Mimi focused on it in her first answer, and Michael just mentioned it. In compensation theory, it really is an interplay between the qualifications of the applicant or the candidate for promotion, and also looking at market supply and demand, and what's the market comparable rate for pay. And from there, you can set salary ranges. And then, as long as you're looking at those fairly regularly, on an annual basis or semi-annually, if you're having a lot of turnover or find hard to fill positions, then you can keep people, you'll have some internal equity. You won't have a lot of salary compression where people are moving up faster than others. And you also can be sure that you are on the road to better pay equity. They're talking about the Great Resignation, and now they're calling it the Resignation Tsunami, where 21 million people left the workforce during the pandemic. And a lot of those have come back in, but there's still about 5 million women who are out of the workforce. And the U.S. Chamber did some research, and one of the findings was, if you want to attract a worker to your company, it could take as much as $1,000 for a sign-on bonus. So my clients were doing $100 or $250, nowhere near that. But the reality is, if a woman interviews, or you're lucky enough to get a talented person to apply, and she is told that there is a salary range, and with her qualifications, this is where you would fall, that obviously you don't need salary bonuses or sign-on bonuses, because they'll know that the company is going to treat them fairly, or the organization is going to treat them fairly. So I think that this is one area where organizations are going to, and human resources people like Mimi, professionals, are going to have to really sort of get in the game if they're not there, and try some of these new policies.
Thank you. Mimi, do you have an answer to that one?
That was great. I think I echo everything that Christelle just said. But just one more thing that I wanted to add to that, which is, you know, when I think about people having long careers at organizations and for many individuals, having that pay being the factor that influences all future pay growth can be an issue, especially as we know that most women have a hard time negotiating that starting salary. And so I understand that was a discussion earlier today, and I applaud the group for talking about that, because really that's your starting point. And then as you get those increases that are a percentage, it just perpetuates the issue. And so, you know, hearing those numbers are startling of exactly how much it could impact your career, but that's how it happens. It really does. It starts that simple as starting with a lower salary and seeing those increments being based off that salary makes a huge impact to that. So as an employer, it's our responsibility to look at that and to make sure that we are paying someone fairly to that position and not using their pay history as looking at the percentage increase.
Thank you.
Hey,
Michael?
Connie,
Yeah.
yes, I see the question. Thanks, Julie, for asking it. Yeah, I think just a few thoughts. One is, I don't think we have to overcomplicate the idea of an audit. You could be a large company that has to go through a very extensive process, or you can be a moderately sized nonprofit like ours. And for us, we made the commitment, I in particular, when I became CEO 8 years ago, to work hand in hand with our Chief Human Resources Officer, just to begin to get a handle on the salaries and wages of our employees, where people fell within those ranges. We are predominantly female within our workplace. So clearly, you know, whatever policies we set forth will dramatically affect women more than men. So we just began to do that hand in hand and just began to look at where there may have been disparities. And then my commitment was I couldn't solve it overnight, but to begin communicating that we would begin to right those issues over time as our budget would endure. And I'm proud to say, I think at my last check-in with our Chief Human Resources Officer, we have, based on comparable data, the positions that folks hold, everybody is basically where they should be within our organizational structure and their pay ranges. And I think that's very, very important, especially for nonprofit organizations. We have a harder time or challenge when it comes to our overhead and ratios for administration, fundraising, and other things, unlike any other organizations may be held to account. But our most valuable resource is our human resource. And when you're better than 85% females in your workplace and you see the great work we do, it stands to reason that those individuals should be fairly and well compensated, because they're oftentimes taking care of their families or their extended families because of the demographic makeup of our staff. So yes, we took it on, but it doesn't have to be complicated. I think you can approach it in very simple terms. Just pay attention to the data, ask the right questions, and talk to your team about your intentions to be able to address those issues over time. I think that will build trust. And when you get there, everybody will feel like it was an inclusive process that they benefited from. Thanks again, Julie, for the question.
Thank you, Michael. So moving on to our next question. The question is, businesses that establish pay based on objective standards without a climate of secrecy and fear has less turnover, higher productivity, and higher profit. How do you persuade top management that ensuring gender pay equity is important and beneficial to the bottom line? So Michael, you want to start that one too again?
Sure, why not? Well, first of all, you know, these policies can be either written or implied. And so I'd pay attention to both. You may have some vague policies, but the implication is if you talk about your wages with someone else, so it'd be some form of retribution. So I think you have to first kind of just understand that and be sensitive to it, because it'll drive whether people are willing to have those conversations, even in a policy change environment or not. I think one of the things that the keys to focus on is, you know, businesses are data driven. And so make sure you present the data and the facts, how removing pay secrecy, fear of retribution, if you talk to folks about your wages, it's your information, you should go share it as you wish, that it will in no way negatively impact the organization. In fact, It'll make your organization feel and be more equitable and more inclusive, which data and research shows that tend to benefit the bottom line. So businesses will actually be high performing and make more money either for their owners, their shareholders, their stakeholders, their employees. And so we did that at United Way. For us, it was easy because I had the final say. I was the CEO. So I could say, we're going to take that question off the application. And I saw no downside. I did see kind of more willingness for folks to talk about their incomes with colleagues who may say, I want to do what you're doing someday. And what does that job look like and what does it pay? And they should be able to share that information without being concerned about what will happen as a result. And so I've seen no downside. And once again, I think our performance as an organization speaks for itself. So.
Thank you, Michael. Christelle, what do you think?
You know, I think this is such an interesting and very misunderstood topic with organizations, private and public organizations. I think that people fear their employees talking about their pay. However, that's pretty naive because in a lot of cases that we've seen personally, the more you tell people not to talk about their pay, the more they want to talk about their pay. And they also begin to develop, in a lot of cases, misconceptions or unreal perceptions about what someone else makes, which can often lead to fears of discrimination if they truly believe that a person who's been there less time, has been brought in at a higher level, or whatever the issue is, whether it's gender-based or not, they begin to create scenarios in their mind, and then they begin to see perceived discrimination, and it actually opens the employer up to litigation and discrimination, lawsuits or complaints filed with the EEOC. So it's actually counterintuitive in some ways, Connie, that it makes sense to publish your salary scales, which of course we do at the state, we do in parish government and local government. It's a public record. It can be found in the budget or found on websites, and everybody sort of knows where they are. And then they're able to talk to their supervisor. Well, what would it take for me to get promoted, move along this pay scale, or even get promoted to the next level? What professional development do I need? What certifications do I need? And it actually helps raise the attention and focus of the workforce in a positive way rather than a negative way. I believe in July, when we did research during the legislature to help some of the legislators with some proposed legislation, there were 19 states and the District of Columbia that prohibited retaliation for talking about pay. So exactly what Michael said, it's literally prohibited in some states. And I think that they know why, because it actually has a reverse effect from what people think.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're going to move on to our next question. And that question is, when opposing equal pay policies, we hear a lot of people talk about occupational segregation. We know that jobs that are primarily filled by women tend to pay less than jobs primarily filled by men. Do you have any idea on how we can get more women into higher paying careers, Mimi?
Sorry, y'all. I'm always slow on getting the mouse over the mute button. Yeah, I think that this has been a long-standing problem. This is not something that has happened overnight, and we've got to just chip away at trying to get more women into these higher-paying careers. And I think a lot of it even starts off with just from the beginning of even awareness of which positions are out there. There are so many jobs out there that we don't even know exist that are in high-paying jobs. I think that it's a matter of, first of all, becoming aware, but then also seeing that job in play. So I always love the idea of having job shadowing opportunities or opportunities to do internships, mentorships, anything that people can kind of see and learn more about those positions. And also to see others like them in those roles. It's really hard to convince women to go into certain positions if they only see men ever in those roles. Is that a place for me? And so, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to have those mentorships, to be able to show them what positions are out there. And, we've really been working a lot with universities too, to making sure that we are reaching out to certain affinity groups so that they can see that this is what banking is like. This is what female bankers are like. This is, that there are opportunities out there. And so I think that a lot of employers have that responsibility too, to go out and to show people what positions are available.
Okay. Thank you, Mimi. So we're going to go to our next question. Knowing that only 1 in 5 C-suite leaders are women and only 1 in 25 is a woman of color, what can businesses do to intentionally look at diversity as they help employers move up the career ladder? So Mimi, you want to start back on that one?
Yes, thank you. That way I don't have to find the mute button again. So there are a couple of things that come to mind when we talk about moving up. Many organizations have leadership programs, for instance, where they may be cultivating that talent from within that are helping them to grow into management positions. And I think that's a really great opportunity to stop and to think about, who are we grooming to be into these other positions? Are we being intentional about the diversity that we are looking at to go up into these upper level positions? And, if you don't stop and think about it and you don't have that intentionality, a lot of times the individuals that are moving up may not be women. And so it's a matter of stopping to think and really to evaluate your workforce, and by giving those opportunities to everyone to participate in those leadership programs. And then, so I think about that when we talk about, our internal talent. And then also when we're looking at recruiting from the outside, again, that intentionality. And, several companies will use, for instance, search firms to find candidates. And when they bring back that candidate pool and they say, okay, here are the top candidates we'd like to show you, we'd like for you to consider for the position. If you're not seeing that diversity in there, not good enough. Go back and try again. Because I think that's really the point, is that we all have to be very intentional about this. And, we've even done where we've done executive searches internally, because we want to be able to explain the importance of diversity for us. And as we talk to potential candidates, when we're recruiting them, we like to kind of tell them about what their opportunities are, and they get to see, the executives that are talking with them. And so I think it's a really important part of it when you're looking both outside the company and inside. How do we be intentional about who actually gets those opportunities?
Okay, Michael, you want to answer?
Sure, I'm just going to echo what Mimi said, that be intentional, offer the personal and professional development supports that are required to help any individual advance, but certainly females in the workplace. I'd also be mindful of the culture of your organization, your brand, your image in the community. What do people see in you, to the point, if it feels like it's a male-dominated business or industry, either in and of itself or more generally, it could be less attractive. It could be more, it could be more challenging to see yourself in it. And so I think you really have to determine, like, your culture as an organization, then you have to live that and breathe that in the way the community experiences it, so they want to be a part. And I think in the world that certainly we live in with United Way and our mission, we have to be very clear that this is a place for all people, and that we practice diversity, equity, and inclusion in every aspect that we possibly can. We're a work in progress and trying to get better at it, but I do think you have to be intentional on the front end. You got to have folks that are willing to apply. They've got to make it through the review process. We're very blessed to have a very sound and talented Chief Human Resources Officer that does her very best to source the applications and make sure that applications are making their ways to managers for review. And being, I think, once again, being intentional and making sure those supports are in place is essential, because this is a long-term investment that we plan to make in individuals. And I'm proud to say, which is probably why we're so successful, but our chief impact officer, our chief human resources officer, our chief operating officer, our chief financial officer, and our chief strategy officer are all women professionals. And some have been with our organization for a number of years. So I hope that demonstrates, with Southeast Louisiana is actually living out the values that you'd find in a more equitable organization.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Christelle, you want to put your little sense in?
Oh, I would love to, Connie, because this is one of my very favorite topics of all. And I'm really still amazed at how many of our clients say, well, I try and hire with an eye to diversity, but I just can't keep people. I just can't keep them, women, African Americans, whatever it is. And that just really bothers me. For one thing, if you're hiring talented people, headhunters will come and pick them off. They will search LinkedIn. They will talk to everybody. They will call. Look, Mimi's nodding because yes, I mean, you know the game. And so as soon as your employee gets their head above the radar, maybe they join a community board or they're, asked to participate in some activity, and then all of a sudden they get a little bit of visibility. Now it's fair game. And so we actually had a client who hired a consultant to help beef up his C-suite's LinkedIn profiles. And within about 4 or 5 months, he had lost 4 of the 6 people. Now, maybe that was coincidental, but I'm just telling you, it's fair game and talent is scarce. So bully for you if you have hired some really talented people in your very diverse workforce, and don't get discouraged. Just say, man, you come to work here and look where our people have gone. I mean, we have graduates everywhere and they are doing very, very well, and turn it around. What Michael said is really true. Your culture, the brand that you have, what's out there on social media, whether it's Glassdoor or something else about working in your organization, what does it say about that? But beyond that, Mimi mentioned mentoring. One of the things we find out when we talk with employees and do employee surveys is that if you don't have a lot of people like you in the organization, sometimes you don't get to know the unwritten rules, the underpinnings of the culture. And so you feel uncomfortable in certain meetings or situations. You don't feel like you have anyone that you can go to with your issues. And research shows from the Gallup Corporation that if an employee, and especially millennials, who we talk about a lot, is able to go to their supervisor or manager, and that person is approachable and willing to help them solve problems, even personal problems outside of the workplace that could be affecting their work, they are 100% more likely to stay because they feel like the organization cares about them. So, I taught at LSU years ago in the management department, and we actually told people, don't develop relationships with your employees. That's really inappropriate. And I think we might have gone a little too far with that advice. And now what we realize is you spend more time at work than you do with your family lots of times. And to have people that you can trust, that you can find approachable, who have resources to help you, can be great. So what an employer can do is talk to their people. If you're large enough, you can establish affinity groups where people are able to meet people like them and maybe have lunches or brown bags together and break times together. Have mentorship opportunities that are meaningful and contribute to professional development opportunities, and intentionally look for ways. If you're able to get people in at the ground floor, intentionally look for ways to give them visible assignments so that other people in the organization can see, wow, she's great. I didn't realize you had so many good people in your unit or division or section, and just actually keep promoting them internally. I love what Mimi said, do an internal executive search. It's a great idea. So lots of opportunities, Connie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christelle. So we're going to move on to our next question. We have about 30 more minutes. So our next question is, with over 40% of mothers reporting that childcare issues harm their careers, and data showing that women who took just 1 year from work earned 39% less than women who did not. How can we ensure that women who leave the workplace to care for their children or their loved ones are not penalized when they return? How do we do that, Mimi?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. And this is an area that I do feel like it is always a challenge, because for women, things are changing and men are certainly sharing in the caregiving responsibilities. But as of today, we still have women are still doing more of the lion's share of caregiving when we talk about caring for children or even elderly parents. So this can be an issue for sure for women, especially the ones that are moms out there. I think a couple ways. First of all, is when we're looking at applications and resumes, when we see that gap, I think that it's worth being able to explain what that gap means exactly. And sure, it could be that I had a child, but during that time, there may be things that that were done beyond just caring for the child, and that could be continued professional development, maybe still listen to podcasts, read books, whatever it is about the particular subject matter that might be related to the career. And so I think it's an opportunity for the candidates to explain what those gaps are, not only for them to do that when they put in their resume, but also for us to be, clear exactly what those gaps actually reflect. And I think that too, when we talk about kind of, it's been said, pregnancy pause, mommy penalty, whatever it is that's out there that can cause this, is that we need to look at our policies and our procedures internally and just kind of challenge ourselves a little bit of why do we have certain policies in place. I think the great example is probably everyone when we were experiencing COVID, we were I hate to use the word, we had to pivot and we had to use more Zoom calls and doing things more virtually. And, that pushed us to do that. And I'll tell you what, we all were like, oh, I don't know that we could do this. I don't know that we could, that we really can continue business like this, but we did. And so having different options for people and thinking a little bit differently and allowing for people to work a little bit differently might help address kind of the things that we're seeing with moms having to balance those childcare issues along with work. There's so many things that we can do. And so I think from an employer perspective, to be flexible with our employees and to really think about why we have things in place. I know that we continue to have at B1 Bank, we have a good bit of our workforce that are still working from home. And that has worked for a lot of working mothers. That was something that helped them by working from home. Maybe it was closer to their child's school. They were able to balance that a little bit better. And so I think by, kind of having a little bit of a balance for and really giving more options to our employees, that helps a little bit for those working moms out there.
Okay, thank you.
Did I answer the question? I kind of went around the world, but trying to be more flexible is what I was trying to get at.
That's a great answer. Yes. So Christelle, what do you have?
Well, I think that when you think about, again, the old days of reviewing applications or reviewing someone's resume, a gap in employment would be a big red flag. I'm going to tell you, after the pandemic, male, female, C-suite, we're doing searches right now, a couple in Jefferson Parish, and we have some really, really talented men who were pretty high in their career, who for whatever reason, their organizations changed locations, service lines, they were in the convention business, whatever it is, they've been out of work for at least a year and sometimes longer. So I think that we will be forced as employers to really, reframe how we evaluate that. Someone put in the chat box that, if we don't have a talent shortage, we need to train people how to recognize talent in diverse ways and with people that don't necessarily fit the mold. And I totally agree with that. So I think that it is more common in women, more women have stayed out of the workforce since the pandemic and are not coming back. And I think, you know, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about flexibility, but Mimi's right, that plays to the primary caregiver and the person who's more responsible for children or elderly parents, which oftentimes is a woman. However, I think that we've got to rethink the whole thing, because while they might be out doing professional development and sharpening their saw, or, you know, traveling around the world in the old days and you know, building their resilience and love of culture and differences, the reality is that that's the world. It's kind of like my clients used to say, I don't want to hire any of those millennials when the millennials were young, because I don't understand them and they're driving me crazy. And I said, well, good luck with that. They're not making more old people, okay? They're making more millennials and Gen Zs. So we kind of got to get in that game, not pine for the old days or whatever. So yeah, I think we're going to be faced with that. And the smart employers are going to really hone in and say, it doesn't matter, this person's been honest about that gap in service. And, you know, this is a great employee, and move on.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next question. So our next question is, COVID has provided an opportunity for employers and employees alike to reevaluate the work-life balance, as Mimi was talking about. Could you share a few policies that you've seen organizations permanently adopt to help meet the needs of employees and their families? So let's start this one with Michael answering.
Yeah, the permanent policy change, I guess, is, I put a big question mark. You know, we immediately, I think, after the following Wednesday, after Friday the 13th in March, we went completely virtual, vacated our building. Obviously, everybody had to quickly adapt to Zoom, etc. We haven't necessarily made any official policy changes, if you will, but it's clear that that's the way we're working now. Unfortunately, our building was damaged during Ida, so we haven't really been able to inhabit it anyway. So I think irregardless, and we're really reevaluating our need for physical space versus the more hybrid approach, but I can assure you that it will be a blend that favors more remote virtual working. I think that has been tremendously helpful to caregivers in all forms. I have employees that are taking care of elderly parents, young children, dogs, cats, you know, things that require them to spend money or time throughout the day to make sure they're giving care to their loved ones or their loved animals. So that's, but I can assure you it'll be somewhat a permanently adopted way of work. But the only thing I caution is that we still make sure that the word balance stays in play, because it's easy for folks to get wrapped up in to work when they're doing it from home and forget that they put in 12 or 14 or 16 hours. And I see folks, I feel a panelist nodding. So that's something we have to pay a lot of attention to and make sure folks are empowered to kind of shut things down and focus on family. But everybody has a different need. And I'm a big fan of, you know, making sure that folks have the flexibility within the time frame of a day to be able to get their jobs done based on what works for them. They could have a partner or a spouse that works shifts, and that could make sure that could mean their schedule hasn't changed dramatically. Once again, they could be taking care of an elderly parent and an infant, and that means you never sleep. And so, but I think it's important that we make sure we keep the word balance. And then I expect that we'll have some more official policies. The only last thing I would say is that for us, and I think once again, this was how we were embodying and living out the culture. Even prior to COVID, we established an infinite work policy. We work with our team to allow moms and dads to bring their newborns, once it was safe to do so, back, and bring them into our building. We had a support system in place where we'd have internal caregivers that would agree to support that parent if they had a meeting to go to. We had a couple of infants come through in the time that we had the policy, which is great. You see a lot of happy people bouncing around the halls when a baby's around. It's like puppies. It's like it just changes the mood of the entire office. But we established that policy based on the need of actually one employee that brought the question forward. Professional working woman that didn't want to have a gap in service and wanted to be able to show up to work and valued that opportunity, but also needed to deal with the issue of I got to take care of my child as well, and my partner, my spouse, my husband is also working. And so that's one thing. And then we also instituted a 90-day paid medical family leave policy, and it's very broad. This can be for you to care for a sick relative, or it could be a spouse or a child, et cetera, your own personal illness. But almost without question, you fill out a form, we get certain validations put in place, and you have 90 days of paid leave that's available to you in a year's time. And so all that to say, COVID is certainly going to change that. You know, people are going to be working when they're sick and not say anything about it. And folks might not use those policies as much, but the bigger point was whatever policies we put in place, they're going to be employee centered. And that'll allow us to make the decision that's best for our staff team and the talent that we have. And hopefully it'll create a loyal team that'll stick with us when they have lots of other options. Because I know one of my greatest challenges and fears, but I mentioned the talented women that are serving leadership positions within an organization. I know they have options. And certainly it's on my mind every day that, you know, there are options that are available to them. And I'm hoping every day they choose to be with us because they value the work that we do, the culture that we have, and the team they get to work with.
Thank you, Michael. Christelle, let's see what you say.
Michael, those are some great suggestions for policies. People really are feeling the effects of COVID, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with organizations where the workload has increased as the workforce has shrunk, and they're taking on more and more responsibilities, and their work-life balance is really out of whack. And there was a recent study that was done where 59% of 30,000 employees across the United States who were surveyed said that they were burning out, that they were really overworked, 59%. 39% say they were exhausted. They're exhausted. So at some point, I think the employer needs to look in the mirror and say, what's realistic for my people? A lot of the reason why women are not coming back into the workforce, but men too, is because a family figured out that they could actually get by on one worker's income. So they didn't ever want to go through that experiment, but sometimes they had to. And they realized, you know, I can make do with less because now we have more resiliency, and we're not as rushed, and we're not struggling to get everybody where they're supposed to be, and get mom at work and dad at work, and somebody's working late and dealing with childcare issues. It's very, very stressful for our employees. So organizations who are family friendly and worker friendly, and who monitor how much work is this person having to take on, really are going to win the game in the long run. I've had more than one business owner say to me, well, Christelle, you know, I can't, we have so much business now, there's so much demand, and I've got to catch up. You know, we lost ground during COVID, so now's my chance to catch up. Well, okay, great. So you're going to lose your good workers who've been committed to you and worked with you all through this time. And now you're going to overload their wagon, you're going to burn them out, and they're going to look for relief, whether it's going home or going to the competitor. You lose. And I have to tell you that it's in my value system very selfish for a business owner to keep doing that to their workforce. And I think they pay for it in the long run. We've had the same issue. We are a small business, and we have people who are very dedicated and very committed. They set up teams for their own projects. I mean, nobody even had to tell them to do it. They were marvelous. But at some point, we would get on Zoom calls, all staff Zoom calls, and I would look, and we kept looking worse and worse and worse. And finally I said, cease and desist, okay? we need to start saying no, or we need to start telling clients, we need to manage your expectations. We can take care of that, but we're going to have to push it off a bit. And it just the few small things that we did really seemed to make a difference. We not only allowed infants at work and paternity leave and all sorts of other things, but we allowed dogs at the office because, after Ida, we had a dog who was really upset, and mom said, I can't, I'd love to come in for the meeting in person, but I'd have to bring Jake. And I said, we love Jake, bring Jake. And it was stress reliever for everybody. So I think that, policies having to do, financial people are so hard to find. We have a client in St. Tammany. His controller, he managed to find a great controller. He lives in St. John the Baptist Parish. His house was badly damaged in Hurricane Ida. So he said, what do you think about asking him to, come in 3 days a week? I said, I think that's marvelous. I've seen clients come up with policies where if everybody in a certain unit or team can come in at least a half day a week in common so that they can have, good quality time together now that we're, not masking and can be together. So I think it really is imperative that employers become more focused on the individual employee and their needs, like Michael said. And, it's not a one size fits all anymore if you really want to be an employer of preference. And the more you go out of the way to understand people, and then do yourself a favor, cross-train people, have backups. If this is, I have to have this person come in because she's the only one who can access the payroll system. Well, why? Let's take care of that. Let's figure that out, or let's get a remote option for that. So I think that we're seeing a lot of very creative and innovative human resources people like Mimi and C-suite people who say, I need women back in the workforce. I need all my talented people back. Let me see how I can do it. And I think they're going to set the bar higher for the rest of us, which is wonderful.
That is great. That is great. So Mimi?
I don't really know that I can add anything after those two incredible answers. I can just say yes. I mean, that is really great. Earlier when Michael talked, I just felt like that was a mic drop moment. Because really, I mean, that's the point, right? Is listening to your employees and really understanding what their needs are, not us coming up with what we think that their needs are.
Absolutely.
And really trying to kind of at least consider it. I know that there's been some chat in the some discussion in the chat about, okay, the dog situation. I love that. I love dogs. And Michael saying, well, I'm not sure. We've got a couple of people that are allergic, but at least we've considered it. At least we've thought about it. What works for Christelle may not work for Michael, but there's some ideas of listening and really seeing what our employees need and trying to respond to that. We can't always do everything, but we can certainly listen.
Thank you so much.
So I don't have any more to add to them. That was great.
Well, all three of y'all just dropped the mic on that question. Thank you. So we're down to, looks like our final question of the day. It says, businesses say they would rather come up with their own solutions instead of being told how to do something. What are some other simple and easy policies employees can implement to help reduce the pay gap? So I think that, a lot of this was discussed, but let's talk about this again. Michael, what do you say?
Yeah, I went back and made some notes too, just to make sure I stay succinct and just go back to your point, Mimi. I think just the conversations, the dialogue internally and transparency are the key. You can't make, everybody's not going to be completely satisfied with every policy or recommendation, but if people feel like they're included in the discussion, then you can at least feel like everybody's had some say in the ultimate outcome. I thought about this question because trying to apply, simple and easy to policies seem to be kind of, the right words, juxtaposed, but kind of hard to do. But I think there are some practical things that you can do. And I know we talked about them before, but removing either written or implied policies around pay secrecy, just do it, remove it from your application, go through and scrub your handbook, make sure that language is nowhere in there so that it can't even be like interpreted as such, and then communicate to folks that that's what's happened. So they know from the executives, the person in charge, the leadership, that that it's okay to have conversations around pay. I think you also have to develop very transparent pay guidelines. We work hard on looking at comps and ranges and making sure those are adjusted and updated and those types of things. And what you do, make sure you democratize that data. Make sure everybody has access to that information. I know we had some points in time where even leadership would say, "Oh, I didn't realize that was available to me." And just because it doesn't mean everybody else knows it. And recognizing things like education, experience, competency, skills, track record, performance, and other jobs or roles are all going to kind of add up to a person's value and what they can bring to the organization. And they should be compensated fairly, male or female. They should be compensated fairly for the work they're going to be expected to do. I know some of the things, and these are things that have been talked about in the past, but through your initial screening process, do you eliminate gender and race, even blackout names on applications, so people can't even try to read between the lines on a name on an application, because sometimes our names can kind of give away our culture, our heritage, et cetera. And so eliminating that so people can just look at the background, the skills and experience and the track record of the individual to get it to a point to where you have a qualified candidate pool. Then you can sit down face to face with individuals and begin to have the discussions around, is this person the right fit for your organization? At our United Way, we have our hiring managers, our Chief Human Resource Officer goes through the upfront screening process and does a very diligent job of ensuring that it's a diverse pool. Hiring managers go through their review process, and then I get to meet with the individuals at the end of the process to make the official offer. And that's my commitment, to make sure that on the front end, but also on the back end, that we're ensuring that we're going to meet our diversity, equity, inclusion goals. And I think it just requires the participation of the leadership and a commitment.
All right, thank you, Michael. Christelle.
I like Michael making a few notes here. So there's a saying in what we do: hire slowly, fire quickly. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the hiring process. I think intentional recruiting, I think making sure that you're opening it up. In the 80s, after equal employment law sort of came in and got digested, organizations spent a lot of time and a lot of thought to make sure that they were posting positions, that everything was fair and above board, and people would know about promotions internally, that they were advertising where a broad spectrum of people would actually see the position is available. And honestly, over the years, I've watched that sort of go by the wayside, and I'm watching a lot of word of mouth. Well, if you have too much of one kind of person in your organization and we're filling positions by word of mouth, you're going to get a lot more people like the people that you have now, because generally speaking, we just have a tendency to have people like us in our circle. So, I think going back to what we know are the right things to do and doing them the right way. I'm a big fan of group interviews in an organization. I think that it's very hard for any one of us to recognize unconscious biases. We all have them. And to be on an interview panel and then have a colleague say, well, did you hear her say this? I think she gets that. I didn't see the same shyness or, lack of resources in that person. And I really do think that, again, if you have diversity on the panel, then you have a better chance for the applicants to see that you value that and feel comfortable being themselves. And an interview can be a very, very threatening situation. Likewise, an interview can be a very easy situation for somebody to game If they have good interpersonal skills, it does not necessarily mean they're good at the job. It means they're good at the interview. And so people see that. If you get enough sort of critical eyes and smart thinkers around the table, and like Michael said, have a multi-tiered process, I think that, you can really do a better job of not only attracting those people that are hard to find, but also helping a person enter the organization, have more people know them and be aware of them, and give them more opportunities. I also think that organizations, in terms of pay equity specifically, they need to analyze their compensation plan. They need to look at where they have more men or more women in a job classification, go in and look at the pay, track turnover, look at what you're doing to make this an attractive position. Look inside yourself first, whether it's a true pay equity audit or it's simply a review. We recommend that organizations do a comprehensive compensation review about every 3 years because the market changes. So, you can be proactive within your own organization about how to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Christelle. Well, that wraps up all the questions that we have for the panel, but do any of you all have anything else you want to say, or you have any input you want to add to what we were discussing before we sign off?
I would like to say that more women need to get out there and talk to young women about careers, about the reality of careers. You can graduate from high school and go get a certification and feed a family of 4 and have a wonderful, wonderful life. If you know what you're doing and you know what your interests are and you know where to go. Everybody doesn't need a 4-year college degree. A general studies degree needs a lot of specialization on top of that. We're just not getting the word out. And so unfortunately, a lot of our young women, I find, get funneled into jobs or roles. Someone who wants to be a nurse ends up going to be a CNA, and that's as far as they get because they really don't know how to navigate. That's a very complicated career path. And so I think helping them to think beyond that, exposing them STEM careers, other certifications that really can take their skills and do wonderful things with it. I think we owe that to our young women.
Yeah, Connie, I would, also I saw my colleague Charmaine Cassiope joined us. So I want to thank Charmaine for her leadership with the Louisiana Women's Policy Research Commission. And Amanda and you, Connie, and the entire team at the state of Louisiana for keeping us focused on this issue, the First Lady and the Governor, clearly because of their collective leadership and making sure we don't take our eye off the ball. And I also just think, once again, as a father of 2 sons and young men, they're going to enter the workplace and hopefully make their way into leadership positions at some point, along their careers, that they also practice what we're preaching here. I think we should expect as much of our young men going forward, because I think they still have an opportunity to ensure that these conversations continue. We make the kind of progress for our sons and daughters moving forward. But once again, just really appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody today, especially with Mimi and Christelle. I mean, clearly I keep good company.
And I guess I would just add on, honestly, I think these are such great answers that I really just add and not, but I say and. I would say that with the expectations of work hours, especially with people working from home, every once in a while I hear about, how committed so-and-so is. They've been working 70 hours. And I think that's terrible. That's not good. Because we do all need to think about how, and women in particular have struggled with this over the years, of that work-life balance and how, and kind of feeling, how do I still be there for my family and be there for my job and get fulfillment out of both areas. And I do a lot of talks on this because it's tough. How do we do it all? And the answer is we don't. Not all the time, at least. There's some things have to give and take. And so I think when we talk about those committed people that are working many hours as an organization, as an employer, having a culture of that's not always a good thing, especially when we think about how people's productivity goes down after a certain level, and really thinking about our employees and what they need and how they do need time with their family and their friends. So I would say just that final note as an employer and also as a working mom, those things do come into play when we think about our employees feeling like they're doing a good job and not setting those expectations of many hours.
Okay, thank you all so much for participating on this conference, but I just want to say one thing. I was looking in the little chat box, and when Christelle said the quote of the day, somebody made you the quote of the day to, they're not making more old people. So that means we've got to get out there and get these young people to work and to do some things. But thank you guys so much. I've enjoyed listening to you all. You've given us a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, Connie.
And I'm going to turn this back over to Amanda. And thank you, Amanda, for including me on this panel.
Oh,
You guys have
y'all,
a
this
good
is
day.
great. I'm in my office all alone, but just with this big smile on my face the whole time because y'all were so much fun to listen to. And what I love is that, all of the people attending today clearly care about the worker perspective, right? We're at how do we get to pay parity? But all of the solutions that we talked about benefit the employers too, right? I mean, you all had such wonderful ideas and we're so embracing of everything that helps keep women connected to the workforce, builds work-life balance. So I thought this was just fantastic. And kudos to all of you. Thank you for volunteering your time and your lunch break with us because this was super enjoyable. And we got a lot out of it and I appreciate you. So we are now on to a break again. So the link is going to stay live, but y'all, I hope that you join us for our afternoon session because next up at 2 o'clock is the Role for Policymakers panel, where we'll be talking about some of the same stuff, paid family leave and childcare, but from a policy perspective. And so we have some national reps on that from A Better Balance in the National Women's Law Center. We have some state legislators. It's moderated by Julie Stokes, who we all know and love. So it's going to be a great time from 2 to 3. And then our Advocacy 101 session is from 3 to 3:30. So y'all, the link will stay live if you want to stay on. The chat will stay live if you want to keep chatting. But thank you all for your time. And Mimi, thank you for coming to us from the supply closet. You rocked it from there. We appreciate you being flexible. So everybody, thanks and we'll see you soon. All right, everybody, welcome back. For those of us who have been with us so far today, we've had a great day. We spent the morning doing a little bit of level setting after we heard from Charmaine Cassiope and our First Lady, Donna Edwards. Then we had a salary negotiation workshop with Summer Stibe with LSU Women's Center. And then we took a break, and at lunch, we had a Role for Employers panel where we had great panelists in HRs and organizational consulting and C-suites, talk about a lot of things that employers can do that really benefit the worker and the employer alike. So that was a great conversation. So I'm super excited about this next panel, which is our Role for Policymakers. We have another great group of panelists. So these are the folks who are with us today. We have Representative Barbara Carpenter, who serves as the chair of the House Labor Committee and vice chair of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus. We have Senator Regina Barrow, who chairs the Senate Select Committee on Women and Children. We have Cameron Dawson, who's a staff attorney at one of our national partners, A Better Balance. And we have Emily Martin, Vice President for Education and Workplace Justice at the National Women's Law Center. And our moderator for this session is Ms. Julie Stokes. Julie Stokes is CEO of Flame Consulting, CFO of Stokes and Associates, founder and president CEO of Elevate Louisiana, and co-founder of the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana. She's a CPA, a nonpartisan policy advocate, a civic leader, speaker, and a recovering, as she says, state legislator. Over her 7 years of service in the Louisiana Legislature, Julie Stokes gained a reputation as a passionate advocate for comprehensive, nonpartisan fiscal policy. Leaving public life behind in 2020, she has opened Flame Consulting to continue supporting projects that she's passionate about. Through Flame Consulting, Julie founded Elevate Louisiana. Elevate Louisiana's purpose is to empower women leaders throughout Louisiana by connecting and educating them on the challenges impacting our state with data-driven, nonpartisan solutions to make a better future for Louisiana. Similarly, Julie also co-founded the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana to advocate for legislation promoting a high standard for patient care in the state of Louisiana. Julie also serves as CFO of Stokes & Associates, where she provides the financial leadership that has grown the company from 2 employees in 1998 to nearly 40 employees today. She resides in Kenner with her husband, Larry, and their 2 children, Brandon and Taylor. And we know she is a super busy woman, so we're very excited that we get her time and talents today too. So welcome, Julie, and thank you for serving as moderator for our panel, and welcome panelists, and we will get started. I'm going to end my share here so we can see all your faces.
All right. Well, it was exhausting listening to my bio. So I would love to hear from some of our panelists. I see Senator Barrow. Maybe tell us a little bit about, yourself. We know you're a senator and a lot of people know all about you, but just a little something about what brings you here today and your interest in the topic. And
good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to see you, my friend. I look forward to being with you in a couple of weeks. And certainly what brings me here is the topic and the issue, especially since I chair the Select Committee on Women and Children, and I get to see firsthand and up front how pay equity definitely affects women who, unfortunately, in Louisiana, about 70% of our households are led by women. And so what the difference that makes and how that impacts the family, how that impacts the child, and ensuring that, I am so sorry, guys. I knew this was going to happen. But ensuring that we make sure that these women are receiving fair pay for the same work is so important to me. And so I'm glad to be here as a mother, a daughter who have experienced some of this myself. This is very personal, and I hope before I leave the legislature, I can see that change. My colleague, Representative Stokes.
Well, I sure do appreciate you and miss you a whole lot too. So thank you for being here with us today. I also have another good friend of mine who I just adore, Representative Barbara Carpenter. And there you are.
Hello, Representative Carpenter.
Hey, how are you ladies?
Good.
You having a little camera problem?
I got it now. This is the name, Julie.
So good to see you, my friend.
Good. I'm so delighted to be here. I look a little different because I haven't had a chance to take my new formal pictures. If you guys know, I'm lucky and blessed to have survived breast cancer past year. And so having lost all of my hair, this is what it's coming back. So this is the new me. And so it's time to that photo. But anyway, I'm really excited to be here to talk with you about the struggles that women have in this state. And I, like many of you, have fought for quite some time that women have equal pay and are recognized for the work that they actually. And of course, I still go through it because I'm fully employed still at Southern University. And of course, higher education, a male-dominated, male-oriented field. And as women leaders on that campus, traditionally less, of course, the men, and a constant fight. So to this conversation this afternoon.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. And I've had that hair. I know exactly all about that hair because
you've been my role model, Julie.
Thank you. And I always said that I would never let it get long again. And this is as long as I'm going to go. And this only happened because COVID. I couldn't get a haircut for 3 months. So I got that awkward stage.
Yeah, I'm at that point because I can't do any chemicals, you know that. And I'm kind of enjoying it, just getting up, just brush and go. So
I love it.
It's amazing. Yeah, you realize how easy men have it in the ways that this way, and also what we're about to talk about. So also, I have a new friend, Emily Martin, who I have not gotten to meet yet. And there she is. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what brings you here.
Well, I'm so glad to be with you all this afternoon. My name is Emily Martin. I'm the Vice President for Education and Workplace Justice at the National Women's Law Center. We are a DC-based law and policy advocacy organization. We'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. We've been really proud and lucky to work with some great advocates in Louisiana on equal pay over the years, and I'm excited to be part of that ongoing conversation today. And the National Women's Law Center does a lot of policy advocacy, both at the national and the state level, around equal pay, which we understand really broadly to sweep in a whole bunch of issues that go to women's economic security. And I also just had my 7th year anniversary for my own breast cancer diagnosis. So I'm really glad to be the sister today, and congratulations to both of you.
It's everywhere, huh? And when you said 7th, I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to say I just had my 7th child. So,
what is that? No. Better to have a 7th anniversary than 7 children in life, personally.
I think so. And another new friend, Cameron Dawson.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to join this conversation today, and sorry for my internet connection worries, but as you know, just being a staff attorney in this work and working with other states that, you know, try to push for policies like paid family and medical leave or pregnancy accommodations, I really love having these conversations with policymakers and advocates, because it's great to bring that perspective to the table. And just as a daughter, as an auntie, and having several family members who have gone through cancer and you know, especially breast cancer, and thankfully have had great treatment and it's in remission, thank goodness. But just trying to make the workplace better for mothers and for family members, you know, who do have those health needs is really a key priority. And, you know, making equal wages and equal pay a priority for stakeholders is really part of the work that I do. So I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Well, we're very happy to have you here today. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first question is just about Louisiana. We're ranked 49th of all the states in District Columbia, you know, for the earnings of women compared to men. And what's the role of policymakers at the local, state, and national level to ensure we move up from the bottom of this list? And I think I'd like to hear that from Emily.
I'm happy to kick us off. I imagine others may have additional thoughts, but yeah. I think there's really a critical role for policy to play. And because the gender wage gap has a variety of causes, a variety of policies help to close the gender wage gap. So one thing that's really important is strengthening our pay discrimination laws at the local, state, and national level, ensuring that, for example, that it's really clear that you can't be fired or disciplined for talking to your coworkers about your salary. A lot of employers still have pay secrecy policies, which makes it kind of impossible to find out if you're being paid less than the man across the hall. Having a clear rule that employers can't base your salary when you start a job on how much you made at your last job, because when you base pay on salary history, pay discrimination follows you from job to job to job and grows through your career, with particularly big impacts for women of color who are experiencing both race and sex impacts on their pay. Ensuring greater salary transparency, because sunlight cures a lot of ills. So whether it is pay data reporting, which was required briefly at the federal level, and which we hope will be required again, where employers have to report their wage gaps by race and gender to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, whether it is a requirement that some states are putting into place that when you post a job, you have to post it with a salary range so people have some information for negotiations. All of that is really important at closing wage gaps. And then sort of looking beyond those questions that sort of all sound in pay discrimination, to think about raising wages for low paid workers, because women in general and Black and brown women specifically are really overrepresented in our lowest paid jobs. So when you raise the minimum wage, when you ensure that tipped workers are paid the same minimum wage as everybody else, that helps raise women's wages and close race and gender wage gaps. And thinking about caregiving and the ways in which women's disproportionate role in caring for family members impacts their pay. So when we have policies like paid family and medical leave, when we have policies like paid sick days, when we ensure that people have pregnancy accommodations so don't lose their jobs when they're pregnant and need some temporary change at work, all of that also helps increase women's wages in a way that ultimately starts to close race and gender wage gaps and gets us closer to equal pay.
That's a great list, and one that it would be great to actually be able to share with our participants, if that's possible. If not, that's fine too.
I can definitely share a fact sheet that sort of hits all of those notes. So I'll post that in the chat while we're talking.
That'd be great. So I remember when I first got in the legislature, we passed the Equal Pay for Women Act in 2013, and it was specific to state employment. So it was only for women that work for the state. It just required that male and female state employees doing the substantially similar work were paid the same amount. If a worker feels that they're being incorrectly and their employer disagrees, the worker can appeal to the Louisiana Commission on Human Rights. What do you think? Do you think private businesses should have to follow the same rules?
I personally, I think they should, because it's no secret that women earn what, 72 cents to the dollar, and for Black women that amounts even.
Uh-oh.
We hit a snag right when she was in the midst. I hate that.
Yeah.
That's how it works. But yeah, I mean, what she was saying is that women are getting paid, and I thought it was 67%, so we must have improved. Oh, Barbara. So Regina, Senator,
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
You want to jump in there?
But in state employment, the secrecy of it is but in private, that's where the problem is. And so you really are not.
Yeah. Representative Carpenter, you might want to turn off your video feed, because a lot of times that frees up bandwidth. And as much as I like seeing your smiling face, it might help with the with your voice being able to come through, because we're having a lot of breaking up.
Okay. But, we could do that. How's that?
Did you turn off your camera?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay, yeah. That would probably help. So no, yeah, a lot of women are employed in the private sector, and so their wage gap still isn't addressed by the Louisiana law.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
That's exactly, and that's a real problem. But I put a bill in this last session to address that. Of course, it's very difficult to get things through labor, and so it would have prohibited them from retaliating and firing an employee for discussing wages in the private sector. So we're going to walk back to that bill in this coming legislative session to see if we can get something going on the table there. But it's a real problem there.
Yeah, well, that's actually, one of the things that we kind of thought about on our speaking, but it has tended to be that equal pay and women's issues have really been relegated to one side of the political spectrum, and how is there a way to overcome this problem so that people of all parties feel like we can speak about that and have a reasonable discourse about it? And Do you see any paths through this?
Well, we're going to try to work with various groups such as your group and several others to see if we can push something forward. But until we get some things on the table, written and become law, it's going to be very, very difficult. And anytime you come before a committee like labor in industrial relations, it's blocked because of first men who really don't understand the issue, or they refuse to understand the issue. And so they feel that there's really no real need for this discussion. So until you not keep it before them, that this is something that has to be addressed continuously, then it's gonna be a slow process.
I was wondering on that particular bill, and I remember when Helena Moreno carried that relatively same bill a few years back. There was a particular, there's a certain size of business that cannot, they already can't prohibit people from talking about their pay. But there's one block of businesses between a certain size and another size that they can. Does anybody on this phone call know that particular number? Because I've kind of been after that for a while.
I don't know it, but that of course was before my time. But I think it's worth looking at, and that's something that I want to explore in this upcoming legislative session, to see where we are with that and how we might need to walk back and see where we need to pick up and go forth with it.
Yeah.
Right now, it's clear that if you're a company with a federal contract, that you're not allowed to have pay secrecy rules and discipline people for talking about their pay. And under the National Labor Relations Act, which reaches companies whether or not there's a union there, you also aren't supposed to punish people for employees for coming together to talk about how much they make. But there are real enforcement problems with that protection, which means that too often companies don't see any reason why they need to follow that rule.
And so they don't.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I think, Emily, you were the one that mentioned it, that there was, for a time, there was a reporting mechanism back to a governmental entity. Forgive me, but it already escaped my mind. But, that's been something that I've always wondered if we could get done. Like, we've run into all these roadblocks getting legislation like this with pay secrecy or equal pay in general, anything that addresses the wage gap for women in Louisiana passed. And through labor committee, labor committee, as Representative Carter said. And I'm wondering, based on what you said about that, if there's any other sort of policy solution that we could implement at the state level that might be more palatable or might have more political will to be able to get it done, might be a simpler process.
Is that for me or is that for one of the lawmakers?
I think it was for you, because when you said that they had to, if there was a violation or somebody was worried about the violation, they could report it back to the human rights something.
Yeah. So at the very end of the Obama administration, there was a federal initiative announced to require employers with at least 100 employees to report wage gap data in their company to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission annually. And they were supposed to report that data by job category, by race, and by gender. And then when President Trump was elected, that initiative was blocked, and actually the National Women's Law Center sued to ensure that it went forward, and it went forward for a couple of years. And anyway, a lot of back and forth. It's on hold again now. But the reason why we thought that was really important and continue to think that's really important is that when companies report that kind of pay data to an enforcement agency like the EEOC, which is responsible for enforcing employment discrimination laws at the federal level, it does two things. One, it gives employers a real incentive to check their own books and to make sure that if there is a wage gap, that there's some good reason for it, and that if there's not a good reason, that they're fixing it. It just really creates incentives for self-correction. And it gives the enforcement agency a lot more information to help them focus their enforcement efforts. Since one of the reasons why it's really difficult to address pay discrimination is so many people who are being paid less because of their sex or because of their race or both have no idea that that's the case because of this culture of secrecy around pay, because people are really don't tend to talk about it, even if their employers permit them to talk about it. So yes, I think some level of pay data reporting is a really powerful lever for closing wage gaps within workplaces. I also think that we've seen over the past few years a lot of legislative interest at the state level around the salary history issue, around prohibiting employers from relying on salary history. And so that seems like a space where there's been some bipartisan engagement and some movement across a variety of states, which is promising, and especially because the early data shows that those laws have really made a difference. That that women, that people of color are enjoying higher starting salaries in states that have prohibited basing salary on salary history.
And I just wanted to piggyback off of Emily's point that, you know, currently this year, we were able to work with Senator Barrow as well as the Office on Women's Policy and the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families to pass the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act in Louisiana that, you know, along with working on policies that make sure that there's wage transparency and equal pay, we're also caring for workers and families that are currently working and need access to those policies that can continue to keep them healthy and safe on the job, or can continue to give them the benefits that they need while they are caring for a loved one, like paid sick time or paid family and medical leave. And I think, as Senator Barrow can tell you as well, this was a piece of legislation that passed with bipartisan support. We were able to message, you know, both the health concerns of mothers as well as what this would do for businesses across the aisle. And, you know, I definitely want to open the door for Senator Barrow if she'd like to talk more about that piece of legislation. But there are other policies that can also tackle, you know, the pieces of disparate treatment for working families and especially women in Louisiana, and help, you know, confront some of those adverse statistics.
Thank you so very much, Cameron, for opening the door. I do appreciate that. And you're absolutely correct. We were able to get that bill passed with bipartisan support, but it did take a lot of work. It took a lot of effort, and it took actually really engaging many of our colleagues who were misinformed about what they thought actually happened. And so what I wanted to add to the conversation from Emily is some of the things that I think that may be gaining some traction, that may be more palatable for some of my colleagues, will be, you know, not the historical data. The salary historical data may be one of those issues. I seem like we are kind of making some kind of headway with that in terms of there being an opening and for them to be receptive to that. And then secondly, as it relates to having a salary range, may be something else I think that we could take a look at. But at the end of the day, we know that it comes down to the numbers, right? I have been there for 16 years, guys, and it doesn't even seem that long. But every year, I have witnessed someone bringing, and I have always been a co-author because the strategy was always to never have, you know, multiple people bringing the bill. And so when I first got there, it was Representative Willie Hunter. He brought the bill every year. Everybody knew he was bringing that bill. And then after he left and was termed out, then various other people, and we have used multiple strategies. I remember Representative Stokes, when you actually had, prior to session starting, right? We had been doing these mini segments in the community where we had engagement from all people, all walks of life to be engaged. And I was feeling very certain at that point, because you was the author, that we would get the bill on through. We was able to get a bill passed, but it wasn't that pay equity bill that we were looking for. A couple of years ago, I remember the governor getting CEOs to come in and to talk about some of the myth that we've heard that, you know, when you raise, you know, the pay, then, you know, it makes it harder for the business to be able to exist, and all the things that we've all heard, right? And certainly I thought when, we had all of these executives, all these individuals from different status, different walks of life, that many of them actually could, identify with, many of my colleagues could, I thought for sure that we would get the bill out and through. Well, we got it out of committee, but it never got off the floor. So I think that we have to continue using the strategy of really educating our colleagues and engaging them. And so this is what I will say, and this may actually get into my next answer in terms of really engaging our colleagues and understanding their position. And I would say start with those individuals who are on the committee, because it has really always been a phenomenal to me to see women vote against the bill. I never could still yet understand that. But if you're not represented by some of the people that are on this phone, then you need to look at how your legislator voted for it and then go and meet and talk with them about it so that you can educate them and get them to understand better why this is important. And if not for them, maybe for their daughter or their granddaughter. And that's the way that sometimes we have to frame it so that they can see that it's beyond them, that it may impact their children or their grandchildren.
Yeah, I think it is a lack of understanding, and a lot of people don't really understand the issues and haven't, everybody's got their own personal journey that they've been through, and their journey may or may not have reinforced that this was a thing. And, trying to help people understand what people that aren't maybe like them are going through,
Correct.
One of the kind of practical, but before I go on to that, I do want to mention that one of the things that I always wondered if we could do some sort of reporting at the Workforce Commission level. I just think that if that's something that we could do, maybe we could get some of that information like they did at the federal level. So that was just a little food for thought. Other practical aspects, one of the things that's practically kind of been gone after is that there's so much of the pay gap that's attributable to what we call occupational segregation, meaning that women are overrepresented in certain professions, and those professions are typically lower paying. But we've seen that many women who were once interested or pursued a degree in STEM, science and math, that they've ended up not pursuing that career after all. Do you see any policy solutions that could help get more women into higher paying fields?
I don't know that there would be policies that could do that.
Yeah.
However, I think we need to start back with the way women are being educated, even coming up through high schools, middle schools, or whatever. Girls are not encouraged to pursue careers in the STEM areas. And I see it every day in higher education. It's rare to see women just push to go into engineering, as an example. And because of that, it's the way that women have been educated up the ranks. And so until we can alleviate the problems related to that, we won't get women who are involved in the higher paying jobs. And the other thing is they have to see role models that look like them. If there are no role models that look like them, then it is unlikely that you will find a large group of women who will pursue those fields. And so we could try to legislate it as well as you can, but I think it comes from plain, simple encouragement and education of women or young girls to pursue those areas that ultimately will propel them into jobs that will require higher pay and thus impact greater living conditions for their families. So that's the way I see it. And that's the start at the bottom.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that, and I bought into the whole thing for years that, well, a lot of women want to be elementary school teachers or
Right.
childcare workers, and those professions don't pay. But, after many years of listening to all of this, I've started to wonder, is it because those professions don't pay, or is it because those professions have been occupied by women that they didn't feel like they had to pay as much, that they're not paid that well? Because certainly if I have a choice between doing accounting for 8 hours or watching 15 two-year-olds. I'm going to pick a
Count
count.
I will just add too that, we hear on our helpline at A Better Balance from mostly working families who oftentimes are working in retail or fast food, that for many cities and parishes, especially, there may not be an available opening for high paying jobs. And so your best paying job may be at the local Walmart. And if you don't have the supports like childcare or benefits to make sure that your mental health is taken care of, or that you can take the time off if you do need to care for a family member, like elder care, who's going through treatments, then that may not be as accessible, to workers. So I think one key thing is making sure, especially with medium-sized or large-sized businesses and even small businesses that can implement progressive policies, that promote health for working families, is that those policies are accessible. There is affordable childcare that's easily accessible, and that people know how to access that through community education, whether it be at the federal level or the state and local level. And then I think also making sure that, childcare is affordable and that workers are encouraged to take it, because it can be there. And oftentimes we see there are policies that pass every day, but if we're not making sure, that communities know about the information, or that their rights are easily enforced or appropriately enforced, they're not going, that law is not going to be effective. So I will just add that piece in.
And I just want to add one other thing really quickly. I think that, because we're moving in this new tech era, right? So everything is moving along the lines of technology. So helping our young people to understand that STEM is in everything that they do. So regardless to what profession you go in, there's some STEM in it. And I think that's part of how we need to shift the conversation as well, letting them know that STEM is in everything. And then hopefully that would encourage them to look at taking on some of the jobs that traditionally they have actually kind of shied away from.
Well, and I haven't always, but now I look at this argument with equal pay as it's just an argument between regulation and no regulation, right? I mean, either you're going to try to regulate and encourage that businesses are going to have to pay equally, or you're looking at the private or the free market for it. And women getting into STEM and not being available to be preschool teachers and elementary school teachers and childcare workers is what's going to regulate from the free market level women's salaries, because once there's no supply, because women are in higher paying jobs, they're going to have to pay people more to do those jobs that they don't pay for. So
That's right.
I think we're sort of in the midst of a version of that moment now, as the pandemic has really led to a lot of people, but specifically a lot of women exiting the workforce as childcare jobs are hard to fill at this moment. I think it's one reason why we at the National Women's Law Center are really deeply engaged in the fight around the Build Back Better bill in Congress, which among other things would have a huge investment of federal funds in childcare, including in wages for childcare workers. So paying that overwhelmingly female workforce something closer to what they are worth, and thus making more people want to do that work, which also helps all the women and families who are depending on childcare in order to be able to go to work themselves. So valuing women's work appropriately really has these great ripple effects through the economy.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, is COVID and the impact it's had. And, there's just been so much focus on caregiving and work-life balance. I mean, I know for me, getting to work right here where I live for the last year and a half, do I want to go back to an office? When I can have my kids in the other room, depending on their age, I can have them in the other room working on their schoolwork. So I really think it changes. It is going to have far lasting effects on how work is done going into the next several decades. And I do think it's altered pay equity conversations. And I definitely think that it's opened the gate, for related policies like investments in childcare and paid family leave. I know, we've been working on early childhood education in Louisiana to get It's $86 million. They've been trying to put $86 million in a trust fund now for I don't know how many years, many years. And I mean, Senator, Representative, I know how it is, and that those boys can find $50 million between the sofa cushions at the end of session for other stuff every year. But somehow we can never scrape together this $86 million. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really not. When at Elevate, we're hoping that we can get some resolution at the federal level on what's going to happen with, universal pre-K 3 and 4 and the childcare work, the childcare funding, to see how we want to be active in trying to get this legislature to move on early childhood education. So I'd like to just hear from either Representative Carter or Senator Barrow, just something about what do you think the odds are? One of the more national people could speak to what's going to happen with Build Back Better, and who knows, with the child care and pre-K 3-4 pieces. And then for Senator Barrow, who I see, and Representative Carter have already turned off their mute buttons, what do we have to do to get this done? I'll let either one of y'all go first.
Well, it certainly, I can tell you just from people I know, just in my district as a point, COVID has had a tremendous impact, and it's been a game changer. And I doubt very seriously if it will ever get back to the way it was. Because what I'm finding now is that as women have had to exit the workforce to stay home and not only just take care of their kids, but they have to teach their kids, because the virtual learning issue has been a tremendous burden on many of them. Many of them have had to pivot and go into other kinds of opportunities to help put food on the table, just as an example. So I think we really need to look at where we are now and what we can do at the moment to bring about change, if I'm making some sense. Because things are different now. And what's going to happen, I'm finding, is that there will be fewer and fewer women who are willing to take the risk now of even going back in some places of work because of the danger of COVID, and it's not going away. So we need to look at some other opportunities for them in order to help them be sustainable in their families and equitable at the same time.
And I would just say real quickly, because Representative Carpenter really hit the nail on the head. I hope the Build Back Better plan does pass with those caveats that we need to ensure that our families, our women in particular, are able, that if need to take care of their family, they can do so. Because at the end of the day, we know that women are the ones who are tasked, right, for the most part, with taking care of the children, being the caregiver of the family. So being able to have that time off to be able to go take care of an aging parent is so extremely important. But what I believe COVID has showed us, and what the free market is going to show in a little while, is the importance of us bringing those people back. Because I was one of those persons, right, that I was trying to homeschool my grandson. And I'm gonna tell you, I was failing miserably. We were both failing. He was failing, I was failing. And so many of us who recognized that we can't do this understood the importance, right, of the teachers. And so all of a sudden now we see this mass exit, though, of teachers leaving. I have never seen the number of persons trying to recruit teachers as I see now. That's going to continue to elevate, no pun intended, but it's going to continue to increase, because women, as Representative Carpenter just put it so well, are looking at other options. Many of them who had dreams of starting their own businesses or going into other areas of industries that now COVID presented them, and they took the risk, and guess what? They're doing well. They're not going back. It's not that they're not going to work. they're not going back to that job. And so we are going to find ourselves really soon with these holes. And we'll have to try to figure out how we plug them. And many of these holes are areas that we need, that we will recognize how valuable those individuals were, whether they were people of color, whether they were women. And I'm gonna tell you, women hold up the world because we know how to multitask, we know how to get a job, 2 and 3 jobs done at the same time. And men are going to recognize, they're going to recognize that real soon.
And I would say one opportunity for advocates that we've seen at A Better Balance, especially with writing memos on how to use ARP funds for things like paid medical leave during COVID and beyond, and paid sick time, you know, especially for areas that aren't preempted by laws to create those laws and policies. It really is going to be important to have reports like that, so that when states do receive these funds from the infrastructure package or the Build Back Better package, we can go in and say, okay, this is the amount of benefits it creates for businesses. This is how it impacts working families, whether you're incorporating paid family and medical leave for state employees or for private businesses. You know, here's where you're going to get the return on your investment if that's a concern for a legislator, or here's where we've seen, you know, ARP funds can be used if you're bringing other advocates to the table, because especially in Louisiana, A Better Balance, we found what really works is coalition building, and seeing that this work is not new. There are many groups on the ground, you know, who have invested time, whether it be from a maternal health aspect or a child and infant mortality aspect, or even upcoming task force who have done research on these issues to really come together and utilize their resources to push for these policies. And then it's up to legislators to really work with those advocates and push for these policies when legislatures are open. So.
And on early childhood education, it's so good for the kids and their results in school, and it's good for the moms, it's good for the families. And I know there's a lot of people out there that'll say, well, you know, parents should be teaching and raising their little kids, but and that's great. I mean, I had the ability to do that, but not everybody has the ability to do that. And it's just so important that we give these kids that might even be in dysfunctional homes, that might be, not every parent's capable of teaching every child. You know, even Senator Barrow's like, oh my God. But I mean, that's kind of a joke. But I mean, you know, there's a lot of people that aren't in this world. We're not all equal in intellect and ability, and depriving kids of being where they need to be on the curve to start kindergarten, to start first grade. It's a tragedy. So we will be active in that. And I look forward to seeing what'll happen federally so we can figure out where we're shooting on that, because that's one of the problems. Do we need 86 million? Do we need something else? We don't know anymore. But so to kind of switch off a little bit, you know, one of the games that gets played, and I mean, somewhat it's a game and somewhat it's true, is that state legislators hesitate to touch a policy because they think Congress should do it. And you see this with equal pay, you see this with minimum wage in a big, meaningful way. I can tell you, I was one of those people that believed that too, until I saw that Congress just is not going to do anything. So I don't see that ever happening. So then it kind of does fall back on states. But, you know, where can local government officials that want to pass wage or leave policies in state governments, how can they move forward? And, you know, like I know here in Louisiana, I believe Orleans Parish has wanted to do some more progressive work in this area, but their hands have been tied by being preempted by, you know, governments above them. Do you see any path through that?
At this point, Julie, Louisiana is just going to have to take care of its own. The federal, we know, has been a problem at that, what, $7.25 an hour. We need to look at some of the other states, for instance, like Arkansas and Florida particularly. Arkansas increased its minimum wage to $11 an hour on January the 1st, 2021. And so Florida did the same in around the same time frame, and it increased it to a little more than $8 an hour, about $8.65, I think. So there's been some discussion at the federal level, and we know where that's gone. But I think at this point, Louisiana needs to step up and do it for ourselves, even if it's in an incremental periods, time frame, so much a year, so much, but something has to be done. And there are a number of states that have taken that on because they realize the federal government is just not going to happen right now, soon enough. And so it's been out there for quite some time, and it's time that we do it ourselves. I tried to put together a study resolution in the last session to be able to bring all sides of the argument to the table, for a better word, the businesses, the workers, or whatever, to try to move it beyond. And of course, it got nowhere because of the tenor of the legislature at the time. But that's not going to stop me from rolling back and trying it again. And that's what I do intend to do in this upcoming session. You just have to keep plugging at it and plugging at it and plugging at it. And it's something that we in our state, we have to step up and do it for ourselves, because it's not going to happen at the federal level right now.
I do wonder, go ahead.
It can be incredibly frustrating. We've seen that in Tennessee, where sometimes it's the governor may do an executive order implementing paid leave, and then take it back to say it's the legislature's job, and then the legislature goes through but doesn't incorporate paid leave and turns it back to the governor, as well as in Alabama, where we've seen, historically progressive cities who have been innovative and very equitable in their rights for their constituents, trying to push this local progress of minimum wage, and then just to be sort of overwhelmed and preempted by the state, later in the legislative year. But I think it still goes to show that there is going to be a role for state and localities, regardless of what happens at the federal level. Now we're seeing it, there may be momentum or progress on the Build Back Better package later this week, but we just don't know, even how things will progress in the Senate. And I think that really does show that state action can greatly impact families right now while they're in need, next year. So I just want to say that with FMLA and federal leave, it only provides unpaid leave, and we are still not seeing the push for a permanent comprehensive paid leave program, on the state level. OSHA is sort of giving emergency temporary standards for vaccines or vaccine leave recovery, but that may not be permanent. And I think we're still hearing, from many folks who are working in all types of different industries and jobs, that they are still going through health crises and still not able to take, the paid time that they need. So I just do think that there is room for either state movement to push for policies, especially as new research comes from the task force that was implemented this year. And also, it's room for cities that aren't preempted to really combat, or cities that are preempted to really push against preemption and repeal those efforts. And I think that's a place where states can really back some of the cities that are, have their ears to the ground of what their constituents need, and really support them in their efforts to make sure that folks are safe, especially while we're still recovering from a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to add, I'm going back to something I said early on about maybe more of a grassroots approach. I know that we've had these levels before, but I think we need to turn up the intensity a little bit in terms of those individuals who are on committees, and because I do believe it has to be done by the state. I think we need to start with each one of them first. And those individuals who live in their district, I am encouraging you to set up an appointment time to go and meet with them to share why this issue is important to you, and then find out what their hesitancy is and asking them for their support, because that's what we have to start it all. It's all about the numbers. I applaud Representative Carpenter's efforts. She's been working really tirelessly on this issue since she's been the chair, but we need the grassroots input. We need individuals whom they recognize, they know are their constituency, who will show up and say, you know, maybe they can show up with shirts on and they don't have to say anything, right? But they know who their constituencies are, and they show up in the room and they have on the color shirts. I've watched that many times, Julie. We've seen that. I remember when I first came into the legislature in 2005, when they said there was not going to be one consolidated levy system. I want you to know there were a group of women who came there. Let me say it again. It was a group of women, and they wore red.
Yep, I know 'em.
Every day. They were just present. And I'm gonna tell you, that law was changed. And so we're gonna have to, I think we need to change our methodology or our approach in terms of how we've gone about it.
Well, and that's what, I mean, part of my whole call in life, it's outside of cancer advocacy, it's trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together. Yes. So that we can hear each other and not see each other as the enemy. And I think when you bring people together like that, that's where you have a real shot at doing something like this. Yes. And I don't think there's anything more important that we can do these days, because the political rhetoric is just making it impossible to get things like this and many other things done for our people. You know, and I wonder sometimes if, you know, we tend to focus this argument on women. And I wonder if we could focus it on just families having their incomes lifted, because, you know, this isn't just about single parent households. And I wonder if we emphasize the dual earner households, you know, and try to sell the guys on, you know, your wife could be making a lot more money. You know, is there another way to get legislators and citizenry to hear this? Maybe by emphasizing that and help, you know, get something passed in this environment.
You're right, Julie. I think we have to make sure that we're changing of our messaging as well and making it maybe more inclusive. Because maybe in the past it's not been as inclusive. Maybe it's been more divisive, and that is something we need to take a look at. I think we need to be open to everything.
Yeah.
And going along with Senator Barrow, I would say, you know, it's always important to center these conversations around the people who these policies will actually affect. And I think bringing real life experiences and stories of both caregivers and women, especially as now we see the majority of women are the breadwinners for their families, or they may be in, there may be a lot of single parent households that are dependent on women's income. And also these disparaging percentages for wage gaps between Latino women and Black women, especially in Louisiana, since Black women represent 17% of Louisiana's population. I think that's really important. But one thing that was successful with the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act in Louisiana was really saying how inclusive this policy is going to benefit the whole entire family by promoting accommodations for pregnant women before they develop a disability or high-risk condition. They can continue to earn money for their children, for their families, and they also make sure that their child is healthy and their infant is healthy to avoid infant mortality rates. And I think also including fathers in the conversation, right? This provides positive benefits for fathers by providing paid medical leave and family leave. And one study found that over the long term, if a father were encouraged and able to take paternity leave, they may even take less sick time in the long run. They may need fewer days to go visit their loved one while they're in inpatient care. And they even, you know, are retained for the long run at that job. So I think having more inclusive language is important, but continuing to center, you know, the real lives of people who are affected by these policies is also, we don't need to lose sight of that.
Well, I brag on Stokes and Associates for a minute. We have about 40 people at the company, and we implemented paid family medical leave, and for men and women alike. And we actually have our first guy that's going to take medical leave to be with his child. And I'll tell you, we've got a young, predominantly female workforce, and it's meant the world to the company to be able to offer that to encourage more women to know that we're going to embrace the fact that, you know, life isn't just about work, it is about raising a family, and that we're going to honor that. And it's meant a lot to our workforce, and seems like somebody's always on it. One thing, and I think we're just about out of time, so I want to make sure, and I don't want to kind of focus this on Cameron and Emily. Are there any policies out there that are innovative that we should be talking about, or anything that we haven't discussed yet, either local, state, national, that can help reduce the pay gap and improve the lives of working women and their families?
You know, one thing that we haven't talked about, but which I think is connected to a thing that we have talked about, which is how women who begin in STEM careers often leave those occupations, is the connection between workplace harassment and wages and the wage gap. Too often, women who are in predominantly male and thus usually more high-paying jobs experience sexual harassment or other hostile environments based on their gender, which can often drive them out of those occupations entirely, or make them step back from work in a way that really impacts their earning power in those jobs. And so I think in the basket of policies that we're thinking about when we're thinking about how do we close gender wage gaps and get to equal pay, that ensuring that we have strong anti-harassment policies, that all workers are covered no matter how large or small their workplace, no matter whether they're an independent contractor or an employee, that there are meaningful protections against harassment, that employers have to have proactive policies and trainings, is another piece of the puzzle that we hadn't talked about yet today.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think also one thing, the conversation sometimes is mainly focused on paid family and medical leave sometimes in these conversations, but I do think that there is also an important consideration for paid sick time that is not just related to the pandemic or a public health emergency, but is permanent, because a lot of jobs, you know, especially low wage earning jobs, that some Black and brown folks are relegated to, unfortunately, don't have any sort of PTO. There is no vacation time. You know, there may not be, the only thing that may be available is unpaid time off. And for many, that really does set up no choice at all. They just continue to work and aggravate injuries, or continue to work and ignore their health. And it's because they're so dependent on that job. So I think if we open conversations around PTO or paid sick time that really do cover a broad assortment of needs, then that is something that, you know, can be brought to the table to address the wage gap.
And I think that's a COVID has really helped for some jobs. I mean, like, there's nothing I can do for a waitress in what I'm about to say, but it's like, don't come to work sick. Work from your house. Don't come to work sick. And honestly, and I know we're just about out of time, but in the future, will you ever bring a child to a pediatrician's office again without a mask on? I mean, come on. You know, I just think there's some things that this pandemic is really it's gonna benefit us in the long run, although it's been so much pain to go through, and for some more pain than others. But I think that it's going to open up a new dialogue about what it is to work, you know, in this century, and how that's going to be transacted. And ultimately, I do think it's good for women, and helping women find their way into the STEM careers, I think will create the market adjustment, honestly, too. But I hope that legislatively we can get somewhere before we have to rely just on the market. I wanted to see if anybody had any closing remarks before Amanda kicks us off the stage.
I want to say, Julie, I really appreciate this discussion, and particularly the last part of it, because the spread of COVID has been precipitated, if you don't think about it, by the fact that many people have had to go to work because they cannot stay home. And so until we address that, it's not going to change. It's just like when 9/11 happened, everything changed. Travel will never be the same as it was before 9/11. So with this that we're going through, it will never be the same, but we have to adjust. And so we have to find a way to make it so that the people who are affected the most will certainly have some relief. And I think these kinds of discussions will help to lead us to that point. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to helping to see where we can move the needle in the next upcoming session. I'm sure Regina, Senator Barrow, my partner in crime, also feels the same way. The beauty of that is that she is my senator, and we tend to work very well together, and that has helped to make a difference in our districts.
Absolutely. I concur with Representative Carpenter's comments, and I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation. I've noticed that in the chat that many of you have made comments, and I've been trying to take notes about those those of you who have ideas, because we are very open to it. Like Representative Carpenter said, she and I are we're good friends, number one, like sisters, or maybe more like a mother-daughter. But we work really well together, and we're open because we can't keep doing what we've done expecting different results. And COVID has really highlighted everything. And like she said, the game has changed. It would never go back to where it used to be. And so I'm open to any solutions. There are a couple of things that I am planning to do, such as looking at the issue of salary, not asking or creating a salary range. And so that way it kind of gives individuals an opportunity of knowing the starting points. So I'm really open, and anybody who would like to reach out to me, let me put my number in the chat box. Or maybe you can do that too. Y'all can just reach out to us because we are open to that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think the key here is just legislators, and I think our current political environment doesn't really give room for growth. I've heard all these arguments, and as you learn, we expect everybody to stay pigeonholed in a particular place, and growth is sort of discouraged. And these are the kind of conversations where I think we can all grow and understand the plight of people and what people go through out there in this world.
I agree.
Thank you so much. It really has been wonderful talking to you guys, and so good to meet you, Emily and Cameron, and like Senator Barra, Representative Carter. Y'all are two beautiful women inside and out. Love you guys so much.
Thank
you. To you, Julie.
Thank you.
Are we finished? Wait a minute, we can't be finished yet. Are we finished?
Well, we're not finished for the day. We have a really
Okay.
important Advocacy 101 session that's about to start, but this panel has to come to a close. But y'all, it's funny you're talking about taking notes. Somebody earlier was like, save the chat. There's good stuff in there. So clearly
I got to put mine in the chat, so I hope you guys can see it. Feel free to call me.
Yeah. And y'all,
if you could put this chat, send this chat, because I know it's kind of hard to grab. I've tried to grab it many times in Zooms and always find problems. But if you could grab the chat and maybe send it, email it, I don't know.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try, because there's been a lot of good stuff in there all day. So thank each of you for your
Thank
time
you,
this afternoon.
Amanda, for hosting this. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, well, I feel like we need to have little spin-off events from this, because every session we've just not quite gotten to everything that we wanted to talk about. But it's been a long day, but it's been a very fulfilling day. So thank each of you for everything that you do every day and for your time with us today. And I am now going to transition us into our final presentation of the day. And let me see if I can share my screen again, share the right screen.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye. There we go. And so you should all now be seeing the beautiful Liz Gary on our screen. And so she's going to talk to us about advocacy today. Liz lives in Mandeville with her husband, Mike, and 3 children, Abby Lynn, Cameron, and Dustin. Dustin is the youngest of the 3, and while Liz's journey into advocacy began. In 2006, Liz started working as the outreach coordinator for North Shore Families Helping Families, a resource center for individuals with disabilities and their families. Her advocacy continued in 2009 when she started coordinating Partners in Policymaking, a national leadership training program. At the same time, she began advocating at the state level and meeting with legislators to advocate for systems change. She's been part of many acts that have become law over the last 12 years. In the 11 years that Liz coordinated Partners, she was able to educate, guide, and empower more than 300 individuals on policy, advocacy, and systems change. Her biggest motto during that time, and one that she still holds firmly to today, is knowledge is power. In 2019, Liz started started working as the LEND Policy and Advocacy Coordinator for LSU Human Development Center. She's responsible for educating scholars on the legislative session, as well as guiding them in policy and advocacy. Liz has actively served on many boards, committees, and nonprofits over the past 10 to 12 years, and we're delighted that she's going to share some of her knowledge with us today and hopefully help us learn how to take all of the good stuff that we've talked about today and channel that into action. So please help me welcome Liz Gary.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite. I'm looking forward to this. Am I going to be able to share my screen? Yes, I am.
You should be able to, and if you run into trouble,
here it is. Nope,
yep,
here it is. I got it. Okay, fabulous. So as Amanda said, I have been a parent advocate for 19 years. My youngest son is 19 years old, so I've been advocating as a parent, but I also started advocating not only on the local level, but also on the state level and even federally. And so over the years, I have learned a lot from that. I have gone to a lot of conferences, studied a lot, done a lot to just continue to expand my advocacy work. Also being on the ground and actually being a part of advocacy and laws helped give me a lot of insight as to what it looks like. So this presentation is very advocacy 101. It's very, starting out. Senator Barrow gave some unbelievable tips, and she was talking about grassroots organizing, and I'll kind of address that. She was talking about connecting with your legislators, which is so important. And so I'll share a little bit about that in this particular, 22 minutes. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to get through it. It's not a whole lot of slides. I can make this available to Amanda if she would like to have this presentation after to share with y'all. It's pretty basic, but I think it's a good starting point. Happy to move forward in the future and do any more if needed, because there is a lot more than just this basic 101 course. So the biggest, most important thing is that what is advocacy? Obviously, we all know it's taking an action in support or opposition for a particular cause. And there's two types of advocacy. There's individual advocacy, where you're focusing only on changing the situation for one person or one specific area. And then there's systems change, which focuses changing laws on policies that affect large groups of people. An example of an individual advocacy is if I went to the school system to try to advocate for my son for his specific issues. That would be individual advocacy. But it's much more powerful if I go forward with systems and go, instead of to his individual school, maybe go to the district or even go to the state to say this needs to change because it needs to affect more than just him. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not moving. And so why should you advocate? Of course, to make a difference. That's the most important. We want to make a difference. You want to make a difference in equal pay. And so that's important for making sure that you move forward. And then you're an important part of the process. Policymakers need your expertise and perspective, and they also to make systems change. You are, as it says, important part of the progress. You have the story to tell. You have the information. You have the concerns that are affecting you. And so therefore you have what's needed for them to hear. Legislators don't know what's going on if you don't tell them. And unless they've experienced it, yes, they may have wives and daughters, but if they're not hearing it from them, then it's important that we be a part of that process of sharing that information. And why systems change? Because the policy will affect large amounts of individuals. It does not, policymakers, as I said, don't know unless you tell them. And there's power in numbers. And that goes back to what Senator Barrow was saying with systems change, grassroots advocacy, coming together as a group to advocate for the specific issue. And then what is important to know? Well, it's very, very important to know the legislative process. I actually do that presentation and have been doing a whole legislative process now for about 10 or 12 years on that specific process. I know we all remember Schoolhouse Rock and how the bill becomes a law, but when you really get into the details, it's pretty detailed as far as once it goes to a committee, then it needs to go to the full House. It could die in committee. And then once it got to the full House, it would have to go to a Senate committee or vice versa, depending upon where the bill starts. So that process is very important, because one of the things that I've learned from advocacy, and I've learned a lot of families, is that when you put out information and tell them, okay, like if you have a grassroots organization and you're putting out notifications to notify your legislators about this particular bill, this particular issue, one of the things that They're always saying, well, I just did that. I just sent it. Why am I sending another email? But it may be that it's only at the committee now, or it's moved to the full House or Senate, or it's in another one. So in other words, you need to know the process in order to be able to get through where you are and why you're doing what you're doing. So, and what else is important to know? Your facts and your story. No one else knows your story except for you, and what you've been through and what you need to share with the legislators, and what your ask is. It's always important to know what your ask. And the most important, kind of going back to what Senator Barrow was saying with the legislature, who are your champions? Who are the champions for your cause? Who are those out there that you know have listened? Who are the ones, and obviously we know Representative Barbara Carpenter as well as Senator Barrow are your champions, but there's more out there. And so you need to connect with them and get to know them. And so what can you do? I think the most important thing is, and I'm going to keep going back, is to the grassroots organizing. If you empower each other by networking with other people, groups, and organizations, there's strength in numbers. You come together as a group and grassroots. When Senator Barrow was talking about the red shirts, I have for years been part of what they called the yellow shirts. Those were those who were in the disability community coming together to advocate for disability services. And when we walked into those committee rooms, or we were in the halls of the Capitol and they saw the yellow shirts, they knew that what we were there for. And at many times we would go in and they'd say, well, we don't know if there's a bill. What are y'all here for? So it could have been that we were just there connecting with the legislators to explain what upcoming bills were. You get to know as much as you know, get to know as much as you can about your legislators. That's very important so that you can connect with them. Also meet them where they are. In other words, don't wait till they're in session to go start meeting with them. This is the perfect time in November now, because for the next 2 or 3 months, they're preparing for their session. They're preparing to write their bills. So it's very, very good idea for you to go ahead and meet with them now, get into their home offices. If you're not able to get into the appointment with home office and they want you to, then what would be good is to go ahead and meet with them at the Capitol. So if they are in a particular committee that's meeting prior to, committees meet year round. And so if they're on a committee that is meeting prior to session, then that would be a good idea. Go to the Capitol, try to catch them while they're going in or out that committee and try to talk with them. Always be polite, friendly, positive, and helpful. I know it's hard sometimes when they're disagreeing with you, but it's important for them to be able to come back and you had to be able to share information with them. And they need to know that you didn't do anything that wasn't good, polite, friendly, and trying to connect with them. Provide factual information. This is very, very important. Make sure you have information that is factual, data to back it up if they request information. Also, giving them data that they can review is important too. Practice what you're going to say. And this goes more about if you're going to go to a committee and present your story at a committee hearing, practice what you're going to say. The last thing you want to do is get totally off tangent and go from a 3-minute timeline to start just bringing in anything and everything that's not relevant. It's important for you to be able to stay on task and stay and focus on what you're presenting, and state clearly how they can help. Ask them. Make sure you have an ask. Show your passion. You want your passion, but you want to still be friendly, polite. Be brief and get to the point. And that is more like I said, if you're in committee, you want to make sure that you're not rambling on because you want them to stay and listen. If you've ever been in a committee, you'll know that at times you may see somebody, they're reading the newspaper or they're on their phone or that kind of stuff. The longer you talk, the more you're going to lose them. Remember, it's important to get to that point right in the beginning, early on, what your ask is. It's also important to have your ask in the beginning and your ask at the end. So when you open up, you say, I'm Liz Gary, I'm here to talk to you about, the disability services, equal pay, whatever it is. And then when you conclude, you say, I'm reminding you that I'm here because bill such and such needs to be either, voted on or voted against, that kind of thing. Understand that sometimes the answer is no, but that doesn't mean you stop. You keep going forward and understand that not everybody is a no. There may be some legislators that are a no, then move on to somebody else who you can help bring in. When you're meeting with these legislators and they're connecting, they will connect with each other. We had the pleasure of being able to, at points in time, to end up getting one legislator connect us 4 other legislators so that we all could meet all 5 one time before we actually got to the committee. Always follow through. If your legislator asks you for some information, for some data, a follow-up email, be sure to follow up with them and get that information. That is very important. So, because that can help your specific, for your specific ask. Amanda, do you want me to stop and go through the chat or questions, or how do you want me to do that?
However you feel most comfortable, Liz. I don't know that we have any chat questions just yet that I can see. So feel free to keep going and I can alert you if I see things pop up.
Okay, I thought I saw somebody had raised their hand, but I don't know how to do that. So
oh, that might, I think there was a hand raised earlier that might have been left over, but I'm not sure how we deal with a hand raise. So people, if you have questions, if you'll put it in the chat, that would probably be the easiest for us to answer.
Perfect, perfect. And yes, thank you, Senator Barra. The yellow shirts have changed laws, and I've been fortunate enough to be a part of them for a long time and had the pleasure of meeting with Senator Barra on many occasions for those laws. So thank you very much. What not to do: never give false information. The last thing you want to do is present this legislator. If they're depending upon you to get the accurate information, do not give false information. And that's not intentional false information. That's if you don't know the answer, don't give the information. Just say, I will get back to you with that answer. That's one of the things we train advocates over and over. When you're telling your story, if they stop you and they say, well, can you tell me about this, or can I ask about this? If you don't know, just say, I need to get back with you on that. I will get some research and respond back with you. That is the safest thing for you to do. And do not take anything personally. Just because the no is a no doesn't mean that it's personally against you. You have to keep moving on and know that eventually over time, one of the things I learned was that a lot of times when we went in the beginning for the community, for those with disabilities, they said no because they didn't understand it. So it took time to get that information to them and explain it. So it may just be that there's more information needed for them to be able to make a good decision on how they're going to vote. Do not demand that they listen to you. That's a tough one. I know it's hard and you want them to hear you, but that's not going to win them over if you're up there at the committee table. And I've been in there before where they've actually had advocates calling out the legislators because they were not listening to them or watching. That is never a good idea to do. And also, do not publicly shame them. You do not want to be blasting them on Facebook and on Twitter and on other social medias because you didn't get what you want. That's not going to work. That's not going to be an effective way. And the role of emotions. It's very, very important to be an effective advocate. You must control your emotions and use them as a source of energy. I love this quote. Just remember, anger is always your enemy. You must keep your emotions in check. The moment you lose control of them, you lose the fight every time. That is very, very important to remember that. I've seen it, and that's not to say I haven't seen many times where moms who are, talking before the committee fill up with tears and get emotional. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking where you're either angry with your emotions or your emotions get the best of you to a point where you're sobbing. Those are the kind of things where you just try to keep it in check if you can. But anger is definitely going to be one that's going to be your worst enemy for sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Jump to things. Okay. So in closing, I know I kind of ran through that quickly. I apologize, but I know that y'all have been here all day and I didn't want to take too much, and I wanted to leave a little bit of time for any kind of questions or follow up. But I think these is the things to ponder from this is the most important things are, do you understand the legislative process? Are you looking to make systems change? Do you know who your allies are for your issues? And are there other people or groups that you can connect with on your issues? I think these are probably four of the most important things as you proceed forward and as you prepare for this next legislative session. I think these are things. And of course, the biggest thing is start making your appointments now. Start connecting with your legislators now. Get those meetings, ask for them, share your story, share your concerns, share the things that have happened to you from a personal level. And I think those are the things that are going to help you moving forward as you continue to advocate. And that is my contact information. If anyone wants my cell phone number, I'm happy to do that also and share that with you. And with that being said, are there any questions? And like I said, it was a very, very, very quick and brief overview, but I wanted to get through it without running out of time. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Amanda, feel free also to jump back in if you want. And thank you.
Yeah, well, while we give people a moment to think about their questions and put them in the chat, I really appreciate that it's right at the 101 level, because I think it can be so intimidating to people. Like, I've been fortunate enough to be in a job where I could follow the legislative session all day. I had a TV in my office that was tuned into committee rooms. And so you're listening and learning not only how the process works, but what issues are important to what people and how to interact with certain legislators or not interact with certain legislators. But that's not something that most people have the luxury of being able to do during their workday. And so I think it can be very intimidating if you haven't, studied all of that. And also it's, we are the experts in our areas, and they have a lot of very shallow knowledge about a lot of our issues. And so it is really our responsibility to educate them. And I do agree that the best way to do that is in the district, where they can take the time and it's not the chaos of the session. So
correct. Well, and Amanda, what you said, I think it's critical too, is I think it's important if they can, if you are able to pull up or give them further information on some of the committees that actually had the bills that were trying to be passed or the resolutions, and follow through. They can go back and watch them. They're all archived, and that can kind of give them pointers on what it looks like, how to go about it, how to present, and that kind of thing. So I think that's a good point too.
Yeah, something else that we used in the Office on Women's Policy that I think was helpful is when there were federal hearings on some of our topics, before our legislature was in session, it was helpful to watch those conversations and see where the arguments were going to come from and what the data was and all of that, so we could incorporate that into our talking points.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Liz. I don't see any questions there. If anybody has any, feel free to put them in the chat or to reach out after and we'll send them. I'll put my email in the chat real quick too. As I mentioned earlier this morning, I'm no longer the Director of Women's Policy, but hopefully we will have a new Director of Women's Policy soon. But my email address is the same, and I'm happy to, I will not let these issues go. I'm happy to still be involved in all of these issues, but also to be a conduit of information with our speakers and our panelists today and with all of you who have attended. And also, I don't want to call you out, Julie Schwam-Harris, if you're still on, but Julie does a great job of connecting people to their legislators, of watching priority issues and saying, hey, especially these issues like equal pay, sexual harassment, so many of the things that we've talked about today, and making sure that she is funneling information with advocates. So if for these particular kinds of issues we've talked about today, you can join Julie's mailing list is a great place to start to stay informed. And then there you go, she put her information in the chat. She's good at saying like, hey, your legislator is really important to be educated on this issue or targeted, because this bill is about to be in a committee that they sit on. And so she's looking for people that are in that district. So there's Julie's information. She's got a great listserv as well.
And Amanda, there's also a great app out called Go Vote, GEAUX Vote, which basically tells you if you don't know who your legislators are and your individuals, that's a great one to go to and see all your information on it.
Yes, great, because that's the first thing Julie's going to ask you. So if you don't know, go look up on Go Vote first. All right.
Thank you, Amanda.
Appreciate
it. It was wonderful.
Very much. And thank you everybody for joining us. I mean, this has been a very full day. I get it. But it's been a very full day, and that we've learned a whole lot. I know I got a lot out of every piece of this, from the role for individuals and salary negotiation and all the notes that I took, to the employer panel and all the things that really kind of opened my eyes in the way that employers could be thinking about this, and how we can maybe turn our messaging to this policymakers panel, where we talked about some things outside of straight equal pay bills, but other things that kind of build a broader equal pay agenda. And then to Liz's conversation about how do we connect with our legislators and how do we prepare ourselves for those conversations. So I think the bottom line after all of this is that now we have to do something, right? Like, we've all gotten educated in it. Hopefully we feel a little little bit more grounded, but we can't stop there. We have to now activate and motivate our friends to do the same thing. And so hopefully when we have a new director of women's policy, they'll be able to take kind of the mailing list from this and make sure that we're keeping everybody in the loop of all the efforts that are happening, particularly the governor's package bills and things like that. But I think, and I hope that you've met a lot of other people today who are operating outside of that official state agency perspective that can also help you mobilize and join groups that are already involved in this work. So stay tuned for more information about the next OWP director and what can happen from the state perspective, but stay connected to the people that you've met here in the chat. So let's see what else I wanted to say. Oh, big shout out to Dr. Tawabich Nagatu, who has been working tirelessly behind the scenes today. T, I would love for you to come on camera and wave if you can, because she has really been behind the scenes, making sure that everybody had the links that they needed and keeping this whole deal, there she is, keeping this whole deal running. And I love her. I will love her forever. And I'm glad that we got to work together and that she's pulled us all together today. So yes, go T. Okay, I think that is a wrap, everybody. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope you have a great week and stay engaged and stay safe and healthy, my friends.